On the morning of September 15, 2019, the body of Sydney Watkins, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher, was discovered in her modest two-bedroom home. The scene was gruesome, with clear signs of a struggle and multiple stab wounds marring Sydney's body. As detectives combed through the evidence, a chilling story began to emerge, one of a divorce gone wrong, a custody battle spiraling out of control, and a father driven to the unthinkable. At the center of this tragedy was Zendaya Thornton, the 8-year-old daughter of Sydney Watkins and Mark Thornton. Zendaya, a bright and vivacious child, had become the unwitting prize in a tug-of-war between her parents. What started as a mutual decision to end an unhappy marriage had devolved into a bitter feud, with both parties fighting tooth and nail for primary custody of their only child. Mark Thornton was born on July 12, 1982, in Hartford, Connecticut, the only child of Robert and Linda Thornton. From an early age, Mark showed signs of a driven and competitive nature, excelling in both academics and sports. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic childhood lay a darker reality. Robert Thornton was a strict disciplinarian with a volatile temper, often subjecting young Mark to harsh punishments for minor infractions. Linda, though loving, was passive in the face of her husband's outbursts, leaving Mark to navigate a household where success was demanded and failure was met with anger. As Mark grew older, he internalized his father's perfectionist tendencies and explosive temper. He developed a persona of confidence and charm, but those close to him noted an underlying insecurity and a need for control. Sydney Watkins came from a starkly different background. Born on March 3, 1984, in New Haven, Connecticut, she was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit, working-class family. Her father, James, was a carpenter, and her mother, Mary, worked part-time as a librarian. Despite their modest means, the Watkins household was filled with love, laughter, and a strong emphasis on education and community service. Growing up, Sydney was known for her kind heart and empathetic nature. She excelled in school, particularly in subjects related to literature and social studies. Her passion for helping others led her to pursue a degree in education at Southern Connecticut State University. Sydney's gentle demeanor and patience made her a natural with children. She volunteered at local youth centers throughout college and, upon graduation, secured a position as a second-grade teacher at an elementary school. Mark and Sydney's paths crossed in the summer of 2008 at a mutual friend's wedding. Mark, then a rising star at his law firm, was immediately drawn to Sydney's warmth and authenticity, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat world he inhabited daily. Sydney, in turn, was charmed by Mark's confidence and ambition, seeing in him a drive that complemented her more laid-back nature. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance. Mark swept Sydney off her feet with grand gestures and lavish dates, while Sydney introduced Mark to the simple joys of home-cooked meals and quiet evenings spent in meaningful conversation. After a year of dating, Mark proposed during a surprise weekend getaway to Sydney's vineyard. Sydney, deeply in love and envisioning a future filled with happiness and stability, joyfully accepted. The couple wed in a lavish ceremony in the spring of 2010, with both sides of the family coming together to celebrate what everyone believed would be a long and happy union. The first few years of Mark and Sydney's marriage were, by all accounts, blissful. They purchased a charming home in Oak Ridge, settling into domestic life with enthusiasm. Mark's career continued to flourish, while Sydney found fulfillment in her teaching and in creating a warm, inviting home for the couple. However, as time passed, small cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect facade. Mark's work hours grew longer, and his stress levels increased as he pursued partnership at his firm. Sydney, while supportive, began to feel neglected and lonely. On April 17, 2011, Zendaya Thornton was born, bringing a renewed sense of joy and purpose to Mark and Sydney's lives. Mark, initially apprehensive about fatherhood given his own complicated relationship with his father, found himself utterly devoted to his daughter. He would spend hours reading to her, playing with her, and planning for her future. As Zendaya approached school age, the differences between Mark and Sydney became more pronounced. These differences led to frequent arguments, with each parent believing they knew what was best for their daughter. By the time Zendaya was 6 years old, the strain on Mark and Sydney's marriage had reached a breaking point. The constant arguments, lack of emotional intimacy, and fundamental disagreements about parenting had eroded the love that once bound them together. The divorce proceedings began in January 2018, and what started as an amicable separation quickly turned contentious. Mark, feeling betrayed and fearing the loss of control over his family, hired Gregory Patel, a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney. Sydney, overwhelmed by the sudden hostility, turned to her college friend Rachel Goldstein, a family law attorney known for her compassionate approach. The legal battle that ensued was bitter and protracted. Mark contested every aspect of the divorce, from the division of assets to the custody arrangements. He accused Sydney of being an unfit mother, citing her lack of ambition and permissive parenting style as reasons why he should have primary custody of Zendaya. Sydney, in turn, presented evidence of Mark's controlling behavior and volatile temper, arguing that his parenting style was detrimental to Zendaya's emotional well-being. The proceedings dragged on for months, draining both parties financially and emotionally. After nearly a year of legal wrangling, the court finally issued its ruling in November 2018. Taking into account Zendaya's age, her established routine, and the testimonies of various experts, the judge awarded joint legal custody to both parents. However, Sydney was granted primary physical custody, with Mark receiving generous visitation rights, including every other weekend and one weeknight dinner. This arrangement, while seemingly fair, left Mark feeling defeated and resentful. He viewed the decision as a personal failure and a threat to his relationship with Zendaya. Unbeknownst to Sydney or the court, this custody ruling would set in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy. In the months following the divorce settlement, Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic and hostile. He began to obsessively document every interaction with Sydney, looking for any perceived misstep or violation of the custody agreement. His communications with her, once civil if tense, devolved into a barrage of accusatory emails and text messages. Mark's visitations with Zendaya became a source of constant conflict. He would return her late, change plans at the last minute, or attempt to schedule extra time without consulting Sydney. During handovers, he would often make snide remarks about Sydney's parenting, or try to manipulate Zendaya into saying she wanted to spend more time with him. At work, Mark's performance began to suffer as he focused more and more on finding ways to regain control over his family situation. Colleagues noticed his shortened temper and distracted demeanor, with some expressing concern about his mental state. Mark's boss, noticing the decline in his work quality, suggested he take some time off to sort out his personal issues. This only served to fuel Mark's paranoia, convincing him that everyone was conspiring against him. Sydney, deeply concerned about the impact of Mark's behavior on Zendaya, did her best to shield their daughter from the growing tension. She maintained a calm demeanor during handovers, redirected Zendaya's attention when Mark made inappropriate comments, and tried to ensure that Zendaya's time with her father remained positive. Privately, Sydney sought advice from her attorney and Zendaya's pediatrician on how to handle the situation. She began keeping a detailed log of Mark's behavior, documenting late returns, inappropriate comments, and any signs of emotional distress in Zendaya following visits with her father. Sydney also enrolled Zendaya in play therapy sessions with child psychologist Dr. Lisa Martinez, hoping to provide Zendaya with a safe space to process her feelings about the divorce and her father's changing behavior. Despite her efforts to keep things amicable for Zendaya's sake, Sydney found herself increasingly fearful of Mark's unpredictable moods. She installed a security system in their home and informed Zendaya's school about the situation, requesting that they not release Zendaya to Mark outside of his designated pickup times. Sydney also reached out to her brother Michael, asking him to be present during handovers when possible, hoping that a witness might temper Mark's hostility. As the conflict between her parents escalated, Zendaya's sunny disposition began to dim. Once outgoing and confident, she became withdrawn at school, often sitting alone at lunch or refusing to participate in group activities. Her teacher noticed a decline in Zendaya's academic performance and an increase in anxiety-related behaviors, such as nail-biting and hair twirling. At home with Sydney, Zendaya became clingy and prone to emotional outbursts. She would often wake up with nightmares, calling out for both her parents. Sydney would find her daughter in tears, confused and upset by the conflicting loyalties she felt. Zendaya's play therapy sessions revealed a child torn between love for both parents and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. In early August 2019, Mark filed a motion for modification of the custody agreement, seeking primary physical custody of Zendaya. His petition cited Sydney's alleged parental alienation, and claimed that Zendaya was flourishing under his care while regressing when with her mother. Sydney, armed with documentation of Mark's erratic behavior and reports from Zendaya's therapist, filed a counter-motion requesting supervised visitation for Mark. The court scheduled a hearing for September 20th, giving both parties just over a month to prepare their cases. This impending legal showdown ratcheted up the tension between Mark and Sydney to unprecedented levels. Mark became obsessed with winning the case, viewing it as his last chance to assert control over his family. Sydney, meanwhile, grew increasingly anxious about the possibility of losing custody of Zendaya, fearing for her daughter's emotional well-being if placed primarily in Mark's care. As the hearing date approached, Mark's grip on reality began to slip. He stopped showing up to work, using all his time to build his case against Sydney. His apartment became a chaotic mess of legal documents, photos of Zendaya, and scribbled notes detailing perceived slights and conspiracy theories. Mark's few remaining friends tried to reach out, concerned by his disheveled appearance and rambling phone calls, but he pushed them away, accusing them of siding with Sydney. Mark's paranoia reached new heights. He became convinced that Sydney was poisoning Zendaya against him and that the entire legal system was corrupt. He started following Sydney and Zendaya, taking photos of their activities and interpreting innocent interactions as evidence of Sydney's unfitness as a mother. In his distorted thinking, Mark began to see himself as Zendaya's savior, the only one who could protect her from Sydney's harmful influence. During this time, Mark's interactions with Zendaya became increasingly disturbing. He would interrogate her about Sydney's activities, make disparaging comments about her mother, and fill her head with promises of a better life once he won custody. Zendaya, confused and frightened by her father's intensity, began to resist visits, clinging to Sydney and begging not to go with Mark. 3 days before the scheduled custody hearing, Mark reached his breaking point. After a particularly difficult handover where Zendaya cried and refused to go with him, Mark became convinced that Sydney had turned his daughter against him completely. In his delusional state, he concluded that the upcoming hearing was rigged, that he would never receive a fair judgment, and that Sydney would always find a way to keep Zendaya from him. It was at this moment, alone in his cluttered apartment surrounded by the detritus of his obsession, that Mark made the fateful decision to take matters into his own hands. In his twisted logic, he reasoned that the only way to ensure he would have custody of Zendaya was to eliminate Sydney from the equation entirely. With cold determination, Mark began to plan the unthinkable, the murder of his ex-wife. In the early hours of September 15, 2019, Mark set his plan into motion. He had spent the previous 2 days meticulously preparing, his legal mind perversely applied to the task of committing and concealing a murder. He chose a Sunday, knowing Sydney would be home alone while Zendaya was at a sleepover with her maternal grandparents. Mark packed a bag containing a hunting knife he had purchased with cash at a sporting goods store 2 towns over. He also included rope, duct tape, and cleaning supplies, having researched methods to eliminate evidence. To establish an alibi, Mark had set up his home computer to make online purchases and send emails throughout the night and morning. He had also left his cell phone at home, connected to the Wi-Fi to create a digital footprint, suggesting he never left his apartment. At 4:30 a.m., Mark left his apartment, careful to avoid security cameras and potential witnesses. He drove a rental car, paid for with a prepaid credit card, to a spot a few blocks from Sydney's house. From there, he proceeded on foot, his heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. Mark arrived at Sydney's house just before dawn. Using a copy of the house key he had secretly made during a previous visit, he silently entered. The house was quiet, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. Mark crept up the stairs, the knife clutched tightly in his hand. He paused outside Sydney's bedroom. He pushed open the door to find Sydney still asleep. The sound roused her and she sat up, confusion quickly turning to terror as she recognized Mark's figure in the dim light. "Sydney, what are you doing to my daughter?" Mark's voice was low and menacing. Sydney scrambled out of bed, her voice shaking as she tried to reason with him. But Mark was beyond reason. He lunged forward, grabbing Sydney's arm as she attempted to run past him. She fought back fiercely. They struggled, crashing into furniture and knocking items off shelves. Sydney managed to break free momentarily. Running towards the hallway, Mark pursued her, his face contorted with rage. In the hallway, he caught up to her, tackling her to the ground. Sydney continued to fight, scratching and kicking, leaving defensive wounds that would later become crucial evidence. In a frenzy of violence, Mark brought the knife down repeatedly. Sydney's screams were cut short as the blade found its mark. Again and again, the hallway walls, once adorned with happy family photos, were now splattered with blood. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. Mark stood over Sydney's lifeless body, his rage giving way to shock as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. The knife slipped from his blood-soaked hands, clattering to the floor. He rushed to retrieve his bag of supplies, frantically trying to clean up the worst of the blood. In his haste and shock, Mark made critical mistakes. He missed several blood spatters, left partial fingerprints, and failed to notice that in the struggle, Sydney had managed to grab of his hair. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Mark gathered his things and fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would ultimately lead to his downfall. At 8:30 a.m., Karen Mitchell, Sydney's close friend and fellow teacher, arrived at the house. They had plans to carpool to a teachers' conference that morning. When Sydney didn't answer the door, Karen used the spare key she knew was hidden under a flower pot. The moment Karen stepped inside, she knew something was terribly wrong. The house was eerily quiet, and there was a faint coppery smell in the air. She called out. As she climbed the stairs, she noticed smears on the wall that made her heart race. Karen's scream pierced the quiet Sunday morning when she discovered Sydney's body in the upstairs hallway. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. "I think my friend has been murdered," she sobbed to the operator. "Oh God, there's so much blood." Within minutes, the peaceful suburban street was transformed into a chaotic crime scene. Police cars and ambulances crowded the driveway, their lights flashing silently in the morning sun. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching in shock as police tape went up around Sydney's home. The nightmare had only just begun. Detective Lisa Hawkins of the police department took charge of the investigation. With 15 years of experience in homicide cases, she immediately recognized the signs of a crime of passion. The brutality of the attack, the lack of forced entry, and the personal nature of the crime all pointed to someone close to the victim. As the forensics team combed through the house, collecting blood samples, fingerprints, and other trace evidence, Detective Hawkins began interviewing neighbors and friends. Karen Mitchell's statement about Sydney's contentious relationship with her ex-husband quickly made Mark Thornton the primary suspect. The investigation moved rapidly. A search warrant was obtained for Mark's apartment, where detectives found a disturbing shrine to Zendaya and Sydney, walls covered with photos and legal documents. Mark's computer revealed his obsessive research into custody laws and, more damning, methods of committing untraceable murder. Meanwhile, the forensics team made crucial discoveries at the crime scene. Despite Mark's attempts to clean up, they found his DNA under Sydney's fingernails and matched the hair Sydney had grabbed to Mark's genetic profile. Partial fingerprints found in the house were also consistent with Mark's. As the evidence mounted, Detective Hawkins knew they needed to move quickly. Mark Thornton had become not just a suspect, but a potentially dangerous fugitive who might attempt to reach his daughter. Unaware that he was already the prime suspect, Mark attempted to establish his alibi. He returned to his apartment, showered, and meticulously cleaned his clothes and shoes. He then made several calls, including one to Sydney's phone, leaving a message asking about picking up Zendaya later that day. Mark then went to a local coffee shop, making sure to be seen by the staff and engaging in conversation with other patrons. He even called the police himself later that afternoon, expressing concern that he couldn't reach Sydney. However, Mark's careful planning began to unravel almost immediately. A neighbor had noticed the unfamiliar rental car parked near Sydney's house in the early morning hours. The car rental company confirmed that Mark had rented the vehicle using a prepaid card, a detail he had overlooked in his haste to remove the car from the scene. The trial of Mark Thornton began 6 months after Sydney's murder. The prosecution presented a compelling case built on both forensic evidence and a disturbing psychological profile of the defendant. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence found at the crime scene, including the hairs matched to Mark and the blood spatter patterns consistent with the prosecution's account of the murder. The rental car evidence was also presented, along with security camera footage, showing a figure matching Mark's description near Sydney's house on the morning of the crime. Detective Hawkins took the stand, detailing the investigation and the mounting evidence that led to Mark's arrest. She presented Mark's computer searches in the shrine found in his apartment, painting a picture of a man obsessed and spiraling out of control. A parade of witnesses took the stand, each adding to the portrait of a tragedy years in the making. Zendaya's teachers testified about the child's increasing anxiety and behavioral issues, which they attributed to the high-conflict divorce. Sydney's friends and colleagues spoke of her fear of Mark and her efforts to protect Zendaya from the escalating tension. Mark's defense team attempted to paint a picture of a loving father, driven to desperation by a biased court system and a vindictive ex-wife. They suggested that Sydney had been the one alienating Zendaya from her father, causing Mark's mental state to deteriorate. The defense also tried to cast doubt on the forensic evidence, suggesting that the crime scene had been contaminated and that the DNA evidence was inconclusive. They presented character witnesses who spoke of Mark's previous reputation as a dedicated father and successful lawyer. However, their efforts were largely overshadowed by the mountain of evidence against Mark and his own erratic behavior during the trial. After a 3-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, broken only by a muffled sob from Mark's mother. Mark, given the opportunity to speak, showed little remorse. In a rambling statement, he continued to blame Sydney and the court system for his actions, claiming he had only wanted to protect his daughter. The judge delivered a scathing rebuke before announcing the sentence. "Mr. Thornton, your actions have not only taken a life but have irrevocably damaged your daughter, the very person you claimed to be protecting. You have displayed a shocking lack of empathy and an inability to put your child's needs before your own desires." She then sentenced Mark Thornton to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. In the years following the trial, Zendaya Thornton remained in the care of her maternal grandparents. With ongoing therapy and support, she slowly began to heal from the trauma of losing both parents in such a tragic manner. The case led to reforms in the family court system, with increased resources allocated for mental health evaluations and support services for high-conflict divorces. Sydney Watkins' memory lived on through a foundation established in her name, dedicated to supporting children affected by domestic violence. As for Mark Thornton, he spends his days in a maximum security prison, his attempts at appeal repeatedly denied, forever marked as the man who destroyed his family in a misguided attempt to keep it together. The local high school in Oakville stood as a pillar of the community, shaping the minds of the town's youth for generations. It was here, in the fall of 2022, that a chilling series of events would unfold, forever shattering the town's sense of security and innocence. At the center of this harrowing tale were two individuals. Miranda Jarvis, a vibrant 18-year-old senior, was the epitome of small-town charm. With her long auburn hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room, Miranda was beloved by her peers and teachers alike. She excelled in her studies, particularly in English literature, and harbored dreams of becoming a writer. Enter Mark Reynolds, a 32-year-old substitute teacher who arrived in Oakville with a mysterious past and a quiet demeanor that initially endeared him to the faculty and students. As the crisp autumn air settled over Oakville, no one could have predicted the dark storm brewing on the horizon. The story that unfolded over the following months would test the limits of human obsession, challenge the town's faith in its institutions, and leave an indelible mark on all those involved. This is the true account of how a substitute teacher's unhealthy fixation on a student spiraled into a nightmare that would haunt Oakville for years to come. Miranda Jarvis was born and raised in Oakville, the only child of James and Lucy Jarvis. Her father owned the local hardware store, while her mother worked as a nurse at the town's small hospital. From a young age, Miranda displayed a precocious intelligence and a vivid imagination that set her apart from her peers. Throughout her childhood and teenage years, Miranda's passion for literature and writing blossomed. She devoured classic novels, penned short stories, and kept a detailed journal of her thoughts and experiences. Her teachers often praised her insightful essays and creative writing pieces, predicting a bright future for the young wordsmith. Miranda's life wasn't without its challenges. In her sophomore year, her parents went through a rough patch in their marriage, leading to a brief separation. The experience deeply affected Miranda, and she channeled her emotions into her writing. Mark Reynolds' path to Oakville High School was far from conventional. Born in a bustling city on the East Coast, Mark had always been drawn to the world of literature and academia. He excelled in his studies, particularly in English and philosophy. Despite his academic achievements, Mark struggled to find his footing in the professional world. He began his career as a high school English teacher in his hometown, where he quickly gained a reputation for his engaging teaching style and deep knowledge of literature. However, after 3 years, Mark abruptly resigned from his position under mysterious circumstances. Rumors circulated about an inappropriate relationship with a student, but nothing was ever proven, and no charges were filed. Following this setback, Mark drifted from job to job, never staying in one place for too long. He worked as a copywriter, a bookstore clerk, and even tried his hand at writing a novel. But success eluded him. As the years passed, a sense of bitterness and resentment began to take root in Mark's psyche. He felt that the world had denied him the recognition and success he deserved. The crisp morning air of September 15, 2022, held no hint of the pivotal moment about to unfold within the walls of Oakville School. As students filed into Mrs. Henderson's advanced English literature class, a buzz of curiosity filled the room. Their regular teacher was out on maternity leave, and today they would meet their long-term substitute. Mark Reynolds stood at the front of the classroom. He introduced himself with a quiet confidence. As he began to discuss the semester's curriculum, focusing on Gothic literature, many students found themselves drawn in by his evident passion for the subject. It was during this introduction that Mark's eyes first fell on Miranda Jarvis, seated in the second row, her hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Miranda listened with rapt attention. When Mark posed a question about the themes in Edgar Allan Poe's works, Miranda's hand shot up, and she offered an insightful analysis that caught the substitute teacher off guard. Mark, impressed by her eloquence, engaged Miranda in a brief discussion about Poe's use of symbolism. As they talked, he noticed the spark of intelligence in her green eyes, the way she articulated her thoughts with a maturity beyond her years. For a moment, Mark felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of intellectual discourse with a kindred spirit. As the class progressed, Mark found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Miranda. He called on her often, each time feeling a small surge of excitement at her thoughtful responses. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Miranda lingered behind, approaching Mark's desk with a copy of her favorite Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. They engaged in a brief but animated discussion about the story's Gothic elements and psychological undertones. As Miranda turned to leave, she smiled warmly at Mark, thanking him for the engaging class. Mark watched her go, a strange mix of emotions stirring within him: admiration, intrigue, and something darker that he couldn't quite name. That night, as Mark sat alone in his rented room, his thoughts kept drifting back to Miranda. He told himself it was merely the excitement of finding a promising student, someone who shared his passion for literature. But deep down, in a part of his psyche he dared not examine too closely, Mark knew that something had shifted. The seed of obsession had been planted, and it would soon grow into a twisted, all-consuming force that would change everything. In the weeks following that first encounter, Mark Reynolds' fixation on Miranda Jarvis grew at an alarming rate. Mark found himself looking forward to his advanced English literature class with an intensity that both thrilled and unsettled him. As September gave way to October, Mark's behavior began to change in subtle but significant ways. He started arriving at school earlier, hoping to catch a glimpse of Miranda in the hallways. He lingered in the teacher's lounge, eavesdropping on conversations about students, his ears perking up at any mention of her name. Mark's nights were increasingly consumed by thoughts of Miranda. He pored over her essays, reading and rereading them long after he had finished grading. He began to imagine conversations with her, picturing scenarios where they could interact outside of class. In his mind, Miranda understood him in a way no one else ever had. One evening, while grading papers, Mark came across a personal essay Miranda had written about her aspirations to become a writer. The raw honesty and vulnerability in her words struck a chord deep within him. That night, he crossed a line he had never dared to before. He searched for Miranda on social media. Mark spent hours scrolling through Miranda's public posts, absorbing every detail of her life outside of school. He learned about her favorite books, her hobbies, the cafes she frequented with her friends. Each new piece of information fed his growing obsession, making him feel closer to her. As his fixation intensified, Mark's teaching began to suffer. He would lose his train of thought mid-lecture, distracted by Miranda's presence. Other students noticed his frequent glances in her direction, the way his voice would soften when addressing her. Whispers and giggles sometimes rippled through the classroom, but Mark was oblivious to everything except Miranda. Outside of school, Mark's life began to revolve around his obsession. He started frequenting the local library where Miranda volunteered, pretending to browse books while watching her from afar. He would drive past her house on his way home, his heart racing at the thought of catching a glimpse of her through a window. Mark knew on some level that his behavior was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. There were moments of clarity when he would be struck by the magnitude of his obsession, and he would resolve to put it behind him. But these moments were fleeting, quickly overwhelmed by the intoxicating pull of his fixation on Miranda. As October drew to a close, Mark's obsession reached a fever pitch. He began to fantasize about a future with Miranda, convincing himself that she must feel the same connection he did. The line between reality and his twisted imagination blurred, setting the stage for the disturbing events that were about to unfold. The first truly alarming incident occurred on a chilly November afternoon. Miranda had stayed after class to discuss a paper with Mark, unaware of the tempest brewing within her teacher. As she gathered her things to leave, Mark impulsively reached out and touched her hand, ostensibly to take the paper she was handing him. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a jolt through Mark's system. Miranda, startled by the unexpected touch, quickly withdrew her hand. She noticed a strange intensity in Mark's eyes that made her uncomfortable. Mumbling a hasty goodbye, she hurried out of the classroom, leaving Mark standing there, his hand still tingling from the brief contact. That evening, Miranda confided in her best friend Lily about the odd interaction. While Lily brushed it off as nothing serious, Miranda couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left her with. She resolved to be more cautious around Mr. Reynolds, but didn't want to make a big deal out of what could have been an innocent mistake. Mark, on the other hand, spent the night reliving that moment of contact. In his mind, it became a significant event, a sign that his feelings for Miranda were reciprocated. 2 weeks after the hand-touching incident, Mark's behavior took an even more concerning turn. During lunch period, he overheard Miranda telling a friend about a poetry reading at a local bookstore that evening. Unable to resist the temptation, Mark decided to attend. That night, he sat in the back of the dimly lit bookstore, watching as Miranda and her friends arrived. Throughout the reading, Mark's eyes never left Miranda. He observed every laugh, every thoughtful nod, every whispered comment to her friends. In his mind, he was sharing the experience with her, part of her world. As the event ended and people began to leave, Miranda spotted Mark. Surprise and a flicker of unease crossed her face. She approached him hesitantly, asking if he had enjoyed the reading. Mark, caught off guard, stumbled through a response, his usual eloquence deserting him. Miranda quickly excused herself, visibly uncomfortable. As she left with her friends, Mark overheard her whispering, "He's everywhere lately. It's kind of creepy." The words hit Mark like a physical blow, but instead of serving as a wake-up call, they only intensified his obsession. The situation reached a critical point in early December. Miranda had been avoiding staying after class and tried to minimize her interactions with Mark. Frustrated and increasingly desperate, Mark made a decision that would irreversibly cross the line. Using the emergency contact information from the school records, Mark obtained Miranda's home address. One evening, he drove to her house, parking down the street. He sat there for hours, watching the Jarvis residence, imagining Miranda inside going about her evening routine. As luck would have it, Miranda stepped out to take out the trash. When she spotted Mark's car, recognition dawned on her face, quickly followed by fear. She hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. Panicked, Mark drove away, his mind racing. He knew he had gone too far, but he couldn't stop himself. The next day at school, Miranda was absent. When she returned the following day, she looked pale and avoided eye contact with Mark. Unbeknownst to Mark, Miranda had reported the incident to her parents and the school principal. An investigation was quietly launched, but before any action could be taken, the situation would take a dramatic and tragic turn. The morning of December 15, 2022, dawned cold and gray in Oakville. As families across town began their daily routines, Lucy Jarvis knocked on her daughter's bedroom door, calling out that breakfast was ready. When she received no response, Lucy opened the door, expecting to find Miranda still asleep. Instead, she was met with an empty, undisturbed bed. Panic quickly set in as Lucy and James Jarvis searched their home, calling Miranda's name. Her car was still in the driveway, her phone left on her nightstand. There was no sign of forced entry, no note left behind. It was as if Miranda had simply vanished into thin air. The Jarvis immediately called the police, and within hours the quiet town of Oakville was transformed into a hive of activity. Police cars patrolled the streets, and search parties were organized to comb through nearby woods and parks. As the search for Miranda Jarvis entered its second week, the Oakville Police Department's investigation shifted into high gear. Detective Lucy Reeves, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, took the lead. Her first order of business was to re-interview everyone in Miranda's life, starting with her closest friends and family. Lily Thompson recounted to Detective Reeves the growing unease Miranda had expressed about Mr. Reynolds' behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She mentioned the incident at the poetry reading and Miranda's discomfort with Mr. Reynolds' increasing presence in her life. On December 23rd, Detective Reeves brought Mark Reynolds in for formal questioning. In the stark interrogation room of the police station, Mark sat across from Reeves, his usual composure noticeably shaken. Detective Reeves began the interview casually, asking about Mark's background and his time at Oakville School. As the questions turned to his relationship with Miranda, Mark's responses became increasingly evasive. He denied any inappropriate behavior, insisting that his interest in Miranda was purely academic. But when confronted with evidence of his presence outside Miranda's house the night before her disappearance, Mark's facade began to crack. He stammered through an explanation about wanting to drop off some books for Miranda to read over the winter break. But his story was full of inconsistencies. As the interrogation wore on, Detective Reeves noticed Mark's right hand constantly fidgeting with something in his pocket. When asked to empty his pockets, Mark hesitated before reluctantly pulling out a delicate silver charm bracelet. With a sinking feeling, Reeves recognized it as the bracelet Miranda was wearing in the most recent photos her parents had provided. Mark's possession of Miranda's personal item was damning. He was immediately arrested on suspicion of involvement in Miranda's disappearance. As he was led away in handcuffs, Mark maintained his innocence, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and something darker that sent chills down Detective Reeves' spine. The news of Mark Reynolds' arrest sent shockwaves through Oakville. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, intellectual substitute teacher with the disturbing allegations against him. Parents demanded answers from the school board about how such a person had been allowed to teach their children. As the investigation continued, police executed a search warrant on Mark's rented room. Hidden in a locked drawer, detectives discovered a journal filled with rambling entries about Miranda. The evidence painted a chilling picture of Mark's deteriorating mental state and his unhealthy fixation on Miranda. But one crucial question remained unanswered. Where was Miranda Jarvis? Despite Mark's arrest and the damning evidence against him, there was still no trace of the missing girl. One entry, dated December 14th, caught Detective Reeves' attention. In it, Mark wrote about a special place where he and Miranda could be together forever, away from the judgmental eyes of the world. The entry was vague, but it mentioned an abandoned property on the outskirts of town. Acting on this lead, police conducted a thorough search of abandoned buildings in the area. On December 27th, their efforts paid off when they discovered an old dilapidated cabin deep in the woods outside Oakville. As officers approached the cabin, they noticed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the mud and a faint smell of smoke from the chimney. With hearts racing, the police team breached the cabin. Inside, they found evidence of someone living there recently. Food wrappers, a makeshift bed, and most disturbingly, several of Miranda's personal items scattered around the room. But there was no sign of Miranda herself. Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds remained in custody, stubbornly maintaining his innocence despite the mounting evidence against him. During interrogations, he alternated between proclaiming his love for Miranda and insisting that he was being framed. His erratic behavior led the district attorney to order a psychological evaluation. Volunteers joined the police in searching the woods, hoping to find any trace of Miranda. In a surprising turn of events, on December 30th, Lily Thompson came forward with new information. Trembling and visibly distressed, she revealed to Detective Reeves that she had been withholding crucial details out of fear and misplaced loyalty. Lily recounted a conversation she had with Miranda just days before her disappearance. Miranda had confided in her about a secret online relationship she had been having with someone she met in a writing forum. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation. While Mark Reynolds remained a person of interest, the police now had to consider the possibility that Miranda's disappearance was connected to this mysterious online figure. The IP address used by the user in the writing forum was traced back to a computer in the Oakville School Library. Cross-referencing the times of the online interactions with the school's records, Reeves found that they coincided perfectly with Mark Reynolds' free periods. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Mark hadn't just been obsessing over Miranda from afar. He had been actively manipulating her, creating a false persona to gain her trust and lure her into a meeting. Armed with this new information, Reeves confronted Mark in another intense interrogation. Initially, he tried to maintain his innocence, but as Reeves laid out the evidence piece by piece, Mark's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a chilling moment, Mark's demeanor suddenly shifted. Gone was the nervous, protesting teacher, replaced by a cold, calculating individual. With an unsettling calmness, he began to reveal the full extent of his deception. Mark admitted to creating the online persona months earlier. Long before he came to Oakville, he had been grooming Miranda online, gaining her trust and fueling her dreams of becoming a writer. It was just after dawn when a search dog picked up a scent. Following the dog's lead, rescuers pushed deeper into the forest, hope and dread warring in their hearts. As they crested a small hill, they spotted a flash of color against the dull winter landscape: Miranda's bright blue jacket. Miranda Jarvis was found huddled in the hollow of an old oak tree, cold, dehydrated, and terrified, but alive. As Miranda recovered in the hospital, surrounded by her overjoyed parents and a protective police presence, the full story of her ordeal came to light. She recounted how she had agreed to meet mysterious online user at the cabin, believing it to be a surprise arranged by a supportive mentor. The shock and terror she felt upon discovering Mark's true identity drove her to flee into the woods, where she had been wandering and hiding for over 2 weeks, surviving on stream water and whatever edible plants she could recognize. The aftermath of Miranda's rescue and Mark's arrest was far-reaching. The school faced intense scrutiny over its hiring practices and student protection policies. Several administrators resigned in the wake of the scandal, and the school board implemented stringent new background check procedures for all staff. Mark was convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, stalking, and child endangerment. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, without the possibility of parole. For Miranda and her family, the road to recovery was long and challenging. Miranda underwent extensive therapy to deal with the trauma of her experience. She found solace in writing, using her journal to process her emotions, and eventually turning her story into a powerful memoir that would go on to help other survivors of stalking and abuse. As for Oakville, the town would never be quite the same. The innocence of small-town life had been shattered, replaced by a wary vigilance. Yet in the face of this tragedy, the community had come together, demonstrating the power of collective action and the resilience of the human spirit. The case of Miranda Jarvis and Mark Reynolds serves as a chilling reminder of the dark undercurrents that can exist beneath the surface of even the most seemingly idyllic communities. It highlights the vulnerability of young people in an increasingly connected world, and the insidious ways in which predators can manipulate and exploit their victims. On October 15, 2021, police responded to a distress call from an apartment complex on Oak Street. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come: the lifeless body of 32-year-old Ethan Reed, a beloved local high school teacher, lying in a pool of his own blood. The prime suspect? His girlfriend of 2 years, 29-year-old software engineer Olivia Rogan. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a disturbing web of surveillance, manipulation, and escalating control that had ensnared Ethan in the months leading up to his death. Hidden cameras, meticulously placed throughout his apartment, told a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. Olivia Rogan's path to becoming the central figure in a tragic true crime story began long before she met Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia grew up in a middle-class suburb of Portland. From an early age, those close to the family noted Olivia's intense need for attention and validation. Margaret Rogan, in an interview following her daughter's arrest, reflected on Olivia's childhood. She was an exceptionally bright child, always at the top of her class, but she struggled to form lasting friendships. Margaret recalled, "I thought it was just shyness at first, but as she got older I noticed how possessive she could be of the few friends she did make. If they spent time with other children, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn." This pattern continued into Olivia's teenage years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later told investigators about Olivia's constant need to know his whereabouts. "She would call or text incessantly when we weren't together," he said. "If I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd show up wherever she thought I might be. At the time, I thought it was just because she cared so much." Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was here that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, remembered Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. "She was brilliant at it," Sarah said, "but sometimes it felt like she was using her skills to keep tabs on everyone around her. She'd casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't possibly have known without some kind of digital snooping." After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues described her as driven and meticulous, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," he said. "When I tried to set boundaries, she'd become angry or manipulative. It was exhausting." By the time Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020, accepting a remote position with her company, she had left a trail of broken relationships behind her. Yet those who knew her couldn't have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed's life stood in stark contrast to Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh." From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. "Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had an infectious enthusiasm for literature. I always thought he'd make an excellent teacher someday." Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from the university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by steady, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. "Ethan was always so balanced," she said. "He valued his independence, but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We broke up because our career paths were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama." The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to life, had ventured out to explore her new surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met across a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his easygoing nature and warm smile, found herself lingering at the stall far longer than she'd intended. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love of classic literature and hiking. Ethan, impressed by Olivia's quick wit and intelligence, suggested they meet up for a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak, offering breathtaking views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, "Ethan came back from that hike on cloud 9. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they'd talked for hours without a lull in the conversation." Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed rapidly. They spent long evenings discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of southern area. To those around them, they seemed like a perfect match. However, even in these early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister Amanda noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time, She'd call or text constantly when they weren't together, and she always seemed to have a reason why Ethan couldn't join family gatherings without her. Ethan, blinded by the excitement of new love, brushed off these early red flags. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "It'll calm down once we're more settled." Little did Ethan know that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually tighten around him, slowly cutting him off from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had all but moved into Ethan's apartment. Despite him never officially asking her to live with him, she began to exert influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Ethan's colleague and friend, fellow English teacher Jessica Lawson, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to after-school happy hours, something he'd always enjoyed before. When I asked him about it, he said Olivia wasn't comfortable with him being out late, Jessica recalled. It seemed odd, given that she knew most of us and had even joined us a few times. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his usually active Facebook and Instagram accounts became sparse, with posts becoming infrequent and impersonal. When questioned, Ethan would brush it off, saying he was trying to be more private online. But it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most alarm bells. Amanda Reed remembered a particularly disturbing incident during the 2020 holiday season. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. For that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said Olivia wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay with her. But I could hear her in the background, sounding perfectly fine. Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her grip on Ethan. She would oscillate between lavishing him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't comply with her wishes. Ethan's friend Mark recounted a camping trip they had planned for months. "The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset he was going away without her, even though she'd been invited and had declined." As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity. Despite having no evidence to support her claims, she would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch. But colleagues noted how she seemed to be scanning the room, as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Ethan's student Emma Chen later testified to a disturbing encounter. "Ms. Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive." Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noted his increasing stress and anxiety, but he would deflect their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister Amanda confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. "I told him I was worried, that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship," she said. But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she'd been hurt in the past and needed extra reassurance. He truly believed he could help her overcome her insecurities. As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible, and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also set up sophisticated software that would allow her to access the feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On the Friday afternoon that Ethan left for his conference, Olivia sprang into action. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, which gave her unfettered access. Over the next several hours, she carefully placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would allay her fears and allow her to trust Ethan completely. The first few days of monitoring proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than easing her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began to obsess over minor details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he waving to out the window? Olivia's colleague, David Cho, later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep suffered, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One evening, while reaching for a book on his shelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He distinctly remembered organizing them just days before. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed rearranged, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly how. More unsettling were the times he felt as if he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a prickle on the back of his neck, as if someone's eyes were on him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Ethan's friend and fellow teacher, Jessica Lawson, recalled a conversation they had during this period. He mentioned feeling on edge in his own home, she said. He laughed it off, saying he was probably just stressed about work, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior added to Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known about. Once, she mentioned in passing that she liked the new brand of coffee he'd bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, though he was certain he hadn't mentioned it to her. When Ethan would express confusion about these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or provide vague explanations. He must have mentioned the coffee in passing, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan found himself second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. Am I just being paranoid? He wondered. Is the stress of work getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister Amanda, but hesitated, worried that his suspicions might sound absurd or that he might be overreacting. The moment of revelation came on an October evening in 2021. Ethan had been grading papers late into the night, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the living room. As he stretched and prepared to call it a night, his elbow knocked a small potted plant off the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, soil and ceramic shards scattering across the room. As Ethan knelt to clean up the mess, something caught his eye amidst the debris. A tiny lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, glinted in the low light. His heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a miniature camera, expertly concealed within the plant's base. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras. In the smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind reeled as he pieced together the implications. The strange comments Olivia had made, her uncanny knowledge of his daily activities, the feeling of being watched, it all suddenly made horrifying sense. The woman he had loved and trusted had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. In a daze, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Through a voice choked with emotion, Ethan recounted his discovery. Amanda listened in shocked silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, to demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb with betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross invasion of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's steady voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras, Save any recordings you can find. We'll go to the police in the morning." As the first light of dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep breath, he typed out a response that would set in motion the final tragic act of their relationship. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable as Olivia arrived later that morning. She entered with her usual smile, leaning in for a kiss, but froze when she saw Ethan's grim expression and the array of dismantled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice quavering. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, cut her off. He spoke of trust betrayed, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep-seated insecurities, her fear of losing him, her conviction that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax into their relationship. Her words came out in a rush, pleading and explanatory, but Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "We're done, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood firm in his decision, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she'd captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute. Even as his heart broke at the sight of Olivia's desperation, he knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no coming back from this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words were having no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a far more dangerous turn. The events of October 15th, 2021, would forever be etched in the memories of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no indication of the tragedy that would unfold. Ethan, emotionally drained from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to take a walk to clear his head, leaving his phone behind to avoid any desperate messages from Olivia. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face set in a mask of determination. She used her key to let herself in, her mind racing with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of righteous indignation. When Ethan returned home around 7 p.m., he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a jolt of fear through him. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wary. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we belong together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia vacillated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with bitter accusations. Ethan, his patience exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. It was then that Olivia's fragile control snapped. In a move that would shock even those who knew of her obsessive tendencies, she produced a kitchen knife she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia, even as he backed away from the blade. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that ensued, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler came into play. He managed to grapple with Olivia, trying to disarm her without causing harm. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time police broke down the door of Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already played out to its grim conclusion. They found Ethan on the floor with multiple stab wounds marking his body, the life already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics rushed in, futilely attempting to save Ethan's life, Olivia offered no resistance when the police took her into custody. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda in particular struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a tearful interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shell-shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The district attorney presented a methodical case, walking the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The recovered surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense didn't contest the basic facts of the case. Instead, they focused on Olivia's mental state, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony an unsettling mixture of remorse and rationalization. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never meant to hurt him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom disturbed. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashland slowly healed, the community was left to reflect on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not just for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic relationship dynamics before they escalate to tragedy. Donald and Violet Dawson were the golden couple of Riverview. They moved into their elegant 2-story house on Maple Street 5 years ago, quickly becoming popular in the tight-knit community. Donald's wit and charm made him a favorite at neighborhood gatherings, while Violet's warm smile and artistic talent endeared her to everyone she met. Together they hosted barbecues, attended charity events, and were often seen jogging together in the mornings, embodying the image of marital bliss. Donald's career as a financial analyst was thriving. He had a keen eye for investments and was climbing the corporate ladder with impressive speed. His colleagues admired his work ethic and sharp mind, often turning to him for advice on financial matters. Violet, on the other hand, ran a successful freelance graphic design business from home. Her designs were in high demand, and she had a loyal client base that appreciated her creativity and attention to detail. Their social circle included other young professionals and couples who often praised their relationship. They seemed to complement each other perfectly. Donald was the outgoing, ambitious partner, while Violet provided a nurturing and supportive presence. They had no children, but they doted on their golden retriever, Max, treating him like their own child. To anyone looking in from the outside, Donald and Violet had it all. But as the months turned into years, small cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. The first signs of trouble were the minor arguments over mundane household matters. Violet would complain about Donald leaving his clothes on the floor or not doing his share of the chores. Donald, in turn, would criticize Violet for her spending habits or the way she managed her time. These disagreements were brushed off as normal marital spats, but they hinted at deeper issues lurking beneath the surface. Their friends noticed the change but didn't think much of it. After all, every couple had their moments of discord. However, those who spent more time with the Dawsons sensed a growing tension. Violet's laughter seemed more forced, and Donald's affectionate gestures appeared increasingly performative. Yet in public, They maintained their image of the perfect couple, never letting their private conflicts spill into their social life. Despite these early signs, Donald and Violet continued to present a united front. They celebrated anniversaries with lavish dinners and weekend getaways, posted loving messages on social media, and attended couples therapy sessions to work on their issues. But behind closed doors, the fights grew more frequent and intense, setting the stage for the dark and twisted events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. As the months went by, the arguments between Donald and Violet became more frequent and intense. The issues that once seemed trivial now escalated into full-blown fights. Donald's controlling behavior began to surface, and Violet's frustration grew with each passing day. The idyllic image of their marriage was slowly disintegrating, revealing a toxic dynamic that neither of them could escape. Donald's control over Violet extended beyond the household chores. He began dictating how she should dress, whom she could meet, and even how she should spend her free time. Violet, once an independent and confident woman, found herself constantly walking on eggshells trying to avoid Donald's wrath. She started to withdraw from her friends, making excuses for not attending social events or meeting for coffee. Her friends noticed the change, but were unsure how to approach the subject. One evening, during a dinner party at their home, the tension between Donald and Violet was palpable. Violet accidentally spilled wine on the tablecloth, and Donald's reaction was swift and harsh. He berated her in front of their guests, his face contorted with anger. The room fell silent, the awkwardness thick in the air. Violet apologized meekly, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Their friends exchanged uneasy glances, but tried to carry on with the evening, not wanting to exacerbate the situation. After the guests left, Donald continued his tirade. Violet tried to defend herself, but her words only seemed to fuel his anger. It was during these moments that Violet glimpsed the darker side of Donald, a side that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The man she had once admired and loved was now a source of fear and anxiety. Violet confided in her sister Rachel about the growing issues in her marriage. Rachel was shocked to hear about Donald's behavior, as he had always been charming and respectful around her. She urged Violet to consider leaving him, but Violet was hesitant. She still loved Donald and hoped that their issues could be resolved through therapy and open communication. Donald, on the other hand, dismissed the idea of therapy. He believed that Violet was overreacting and that their problems were normal marital issues. He continued to exert control over every aspect of Violet's life, from her work to her friendships. Violet felt increasingly isolated and trapped, her once vibrant personality dimming under the weight of Donald's dominance. The unraveling of Donald and Violet's marriage was rooted in their pasts, hidden traumas and manipulative tendencies that had remained buried until now. Donald's need for control stemmed from his childhood, where he grew up in a household dominated by his tyrannical father. Witnessing his mother's submissiveness and his father's oppressive behavior, Donald internalized the notion that control was synonymous with love and respect. Violet's past was marked by a different kind of trauma. She had been in an abusive relationship during her college years, which left her with deep emotional scars. She had worked hard to rebuild her life, seeking therapy and finding solace in her career. Meeting Donald had seemed like a fresh start, a chance to leave her painful past behind. But as the years went by, the echoes of her past trauma resurfaced, exacerbated by Donald's controlling behavior. Their marriage, which had once seemed like a partnership of equals, transformed into a battleground of wills. Donald's manipulative tendencies became more pronounced, and Violet's hidden traumas were exploited. Donald would use Violet's past against her, belittling her experiences and making her feel unworthy of love and respect. He manipulated her emotions, alternating between affectionate gestures and harsh criticisms, leaving Violet constantly second-guessing herself. Violet's attempts to seek help from friends or family were often thwarted by Donald's interference. He would charm her friends, making them believe that Violet was exaggerating or being overly sensitive. He isolated her from those who could offer support, ensuring that she remained dependent on him. Violet's cries for help were met with skepticism, as Donald's outward charm and charisma masked his true nature. The twisted game of manipulation and control escalated over time. Donald would gaslight Violet, making her doubt her own perceptions and memories. He would hide her belongings, then accuse her of being forgetful. He would criticize her appearance and decisions, undermining her confidence. Violet, caught in this web of psychological abuse, felt her sense of reality slipping away. Despite the escalating abuse, Violet clung to the hope that things could change. She believed that if she just tried harder, if she just loved Donald enough, things would go back to the way they were. She blamed herself for the growing tension, convinced that she was the problem. Donald reinforced this belief, using it to tighten his grip on her. The turning point in Donald and Violet's tumultuous relationship came one night during an argument that escalated beyond verbal altercations. It started as a typical disagreement over household chores, but the tension quickly mounted. Donald's face twisted with anger as he accused Violet of being lazy and ungrateful. Violet, her patience worn thin, snapped back, telling Donald that she was tired of his constant criticism and control. The argument spiraled out of control, with both of them shouting and hurling accusations. Donald's anger boiled over, and for the first time he struck Violet. The force of the blow sent her reeling, her cheeks stinging from the impact. The room fell silent, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Donald, momentarily stunned by his own actions, quickly regained his composure and began to apologize profusely. He promised it would never happen again, blaming the stress from work and the pressures of life. Violet, shocked and hurt, didn't know how to respond. She had never imagined that their arguments would turn physical. Despite her fear, a part of her still clung to the hope that Donald could change. She accepted his apology, convincing herself that it was a one-time incident, an unfortunate outburst that wouldn't be repeated. But the physical abuse didn't stop. Over the following weeks, Donald's outbursts became more frequent and violent. Violet tried to hide the bruises, making excuses for her injuries when friends or colleagues asked. She became adept at covering up the signs of abuse, using makeup to mask the bruises and long sleeves to hide the marks. Her once vibrant spirit was replaced by a shadow of her former self, her eyes reflecting a deep-seated fear and sadness. In a desperate attempt to break free from the cycle of abuse, Violet confided in her closest friend, Kate. She told Kate about the physical violence and Donald's controlling behavior, hoping that sharing her secret would give her the strength to leave. Kate was horrified and immediately offered her support, urging Violet to contact a domestic violence hotline and seek help. Violet took Kate's advice and called the hotline, speaking to a counselor who provided her with resources and a safety plan. She started to make preparations to leave, gathering important documents and saving money in a hidden account. Violet felt a glimmer of hope, believing that she could escape the nightmare her life had become. However, Donald's control over Violet was stronger than she anticipated. He grew suspicious of her actions, noticing the small changes in her behavior and the secretive nature of her movements. His paranoia intensified, and he began to monitor her closely, checking her phone and following her when she left the house. Violet's attempts to break free were thwarted at every turn as Donald tightened his grip on her life. The breaking point came when Violet tried to leave one night, only to be caught by Donald as she was sneaking out of the house with a suitcase. Enraged, Donald dragged her back inside, accusing her of betrayal and threatening her with dire consequences if she ever tried to leave again. Violet, terrified and defeated, realized that escaping Donald's control was more difficult than she had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Donald's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He installed surveillance cameras in the house, monitored Violet's every move, and cut off her access to the outside world. Violet felt like a prisoner in her own home, her every action scrutinized and controlled. The glimmer of hope that had once sustained her was extinguished, replaced by a sense of despair and resignation. The twisted game of manipulation and control had reached a dangerous new level, with Donald's paranoia and violence threatening to consume them both. Despite the overwhelming fear and isolation, Violet continued to hold on to a sliver of hope. She documented the abuse in a hidden journal, detailing each incident with meticulous care. One night, after a particularly violent argument, Violet decided she couldn't take it anymore. The fight had started over a minor issue, Donald accusing her of not cooking dinner to his liking, but it quickly escalated. Donald's rage was uncontrollable, and he beat Violet until she was barely conscious. As she lay on the floor, battered and bleeding, Violet made a silent vow to escape no matter the cost. Over the next few days, Violet meticulously planned her escape. She reached out to Kate through a coded message, arranging a time and place to meet. Kate, understanding the gravity of the situation, agreed to help without hesitation. On the night of their planned escape, Violet waited until Donald was asleep before making her move. She quietly gathered her pre-packed bag and slipped out of the house. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the meeting spot, every shadow and sound amplifying her fear. Kate was waiting at the designated spot, her car idling and ready to go. Violet climbed into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she clutched her bag. Kate didn't waste any time, driving away from the house as quickly as possible. The sense of relief Violet felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that her freedom was still fragile. They drove to a nearby town, where Kate had arranged for Violet to stay at a women's shelter. The shelter provided a safe haven, a place where Violet could begin to rebuild her life without fear of Donald's retribution. The staff at the shelter were supportive and understanding, helping Violet navigate the legal process of obtaining a restraining order and pressing charges against Donald. For the first time in years, Violet felt a glimmer of hope. She was surrounded by people who believed her, who validated her experiences, and provided her with the support she desperately needed. The journey to recovery was daunting, but Violet was determined to reclaim her life and break free from the cycle of abuse. However, Donald was not willing to let go so easily. When he discovered Violet's absence, his rage knew no bounds. He used every resource at his disposal to track her down, refusing to accept that she had escaped his control. The twisted game of manipulation and control had reached its final, deadly stage, setting the stage for a confrontation that would have tragic consequences. Violet had been staying at the women's shelter for a few weeks, slowly beginning to heal and regain her sense of self. The staff and other residents provided a supportive community, helping her navigate the complexities of her situation. She had obtained a restraining order against Donald, and the shelter had taken measures to ensure her safety. However, Donald's obsession with Violet only grew stronger in her absence. He scoured social media to track her down. His need to control her had reached a dangerous level, driven by a toxic mix of anger, jealousy, and possessiveness. Donald's paranoia and determination to reclaim Violet culminated in a meticulously planned confrontation. On the night of June 27th, Donald finally discovered Violet's location. He had been stalking the shelter for days, watching and waiting for the right moment. When he saw Violet leave the shelter to run an errand, he followed her, careful to remain undetected. Violet was unaware of his presence, her mind occupied with thoughts of her new life and the steps she needed to take to move forward. As Violet returned to the shelter, she felt a strange unease, a sense that something was not right. She quickened her pace, her heart racing as she approached the shelter's entrance. Before she could reach the door, Donald appeared, blocking her path. The look in his eyes was a chilling combination of rage and determination. Donald's voice was low and menacing as he demanded that Violet come with him. Violet tried to remain calm, her voice shaking as she told him to leave and that she had a restraining order against him. But Donald was beyond reason. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful, and started dragging her towards his car. Violet struggled, screaming for help, but the street was deserted and her cries went unanswered. In a desperate bid to break free, Violet managed to pull out her phone and dial 911. The call connected, but before she could speak, Donald slapped the phone out of her hand, sending it crashing to the ground. Violet's panic intensified as she realized the severity of the situation. Donald's anger was palpable, his grip on her arm unrelenting. In a final desperate attempt to escape, Violet kicked Donald and tried to run. But Donald was faster and stronger. He caught up to her, and in a fit of rage began to beat her mercilessly. Violet's cries for help echoed through the empty street, but no one came to her aid. Donald's fury was uncontrollable, and he didn't stop until Violet lay motionless on the ground. As the reality of what he had done sank in, Donald's rage gave way to panic. He looked around, realizing that the commotion could attract attention. He quickly dragged Violet's body to his car, his mind racing as he tried to think of a plan. He knew he needed to get rid of the evidence and cover his tracks. Donald drove to a remote area outside of town, a place he knew would be deserted at this hour. He put his hand on her neck. There was no pulse. He carried her into the woods, his heart pounding as he dug a shallow grave. He placed her body in the grave, covering it with dirt and debris. Donald's hands shook as he worked, the reality of his actions hitting him with full force. He knew there was no turning back. After burying Violet, Donald returned to his car, his mind racing with thoughts of how to cover his tracks. He disposed of her belongings, including her phone, and cleaned the car meticulously, trying to eliminate any traces of evidence. Donald knew that the police would come looking for him, but he was confident that he could outsmart them. Back at the shelter, the staff discovered Violet's absence and the signs of a struggle near the entrance. They immediately called the police, reporting her missing and providing details of her situation. The police launched an investigation, quickly identifying Donald as the prime suspect. The investigation was swift and thorough. Donald's history of abuse, the restraining order, and his known obsession with Violet made him the obvious suspect. The police tracked his movements, interviewed witnesses, and gathered evidence. It didn't take long for them to piece together the events of that fateful night. Friends and family were interviewed, providing crucial insights into the dynamics of Donald and Violet's relationship. Kate, Violet's closest friend, recounted the numerous times Violet had confided in her about the abuse. She shared the details of Violet's escape plan and their coded messages, revealing the extent of Violet's fear and desperation. Kate's testimony painted a stark contrast between the public image of the Dawsons and the dark reality behind closed doors. Rachel, Violet's sister, spoke of the early signs of trouble she had noticed in their marriage. She described Donald's controlling behavior and the gradual isolation of Violet from her family. Rachel's account of Violet's past trauma and her struggles to rebuild her life added another layer to the understanding of the abuse she had endured. During the interrogation, Donald initially tried to maintain his innocence, but the weight of the evidence was too great. His story unraveled under the pressure, and he eventually confessed to the murder. He described the events of that night with chilling detail, his voice devoid of remorse or empathy. Donald's confession confirmed the police's findings, solidifying the case against him. The community of Riverview was shocked by the revelations. The couple they had once admired and envied had been hiding a dark and twisted reality. The news of Violet's murder and the details of the abuse she had suffered sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. The unraveling of Donald and Violet's relationship, from the seemingly perfect marriage to the tragic and violent end, served as a stark reminder of the dangers of domestic abuse. After several days of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Donald was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the community of Riverview could begin to heal. The murder of Violet Dawson was a tragic and heartbreaking event that left an indelible mark on the community of Riverview. The seemingly perfect couple, whose public life had been the envy of many, was revealed to have been hiding a dark and twisted reality. Born Celeste DuPont in a small Louisiana town, the woman who would become Madame Celeste had a childhood steeped in poverty and superstition. Her mother, Yvette, was a practitioner of voodoo, while her father, Jean-Paul, was a charming con artist who drifted in and out of their lives. From an early age, Celeste learned the art of reading people, picking up on subtle cues and body language that would later serve her well in her chosen profession. As a child, Celeste was often left to her own devices, spending hours exploring the bayou and listening to the stories of local elders. She was particularly drawn to tales of the supernatural, soaking up every bit of folklore and mysticism she could find. It was during this time that she first claimed to have visions, describing vivid dreams that seemed to predict future events. As she entered her teenage years, Celeste's natural beauty and newfound abilities made her the talk of the town. She began to hold seances for her classmates, charging small fees for her services. It was during one of these sessions that she met Thomas, a charismatic drifter who recognized her talent for deception. Together, they embarked on a series of small-time cons across the South, posing as faith healers and fortune-tellers. Their partnership, both romantic and professional, lasted for several years until a scam went wrong. Thomas was arrested, but Celeste managed to evade the authorities. It was then that she decided to reinvent herself, dyeing her hair and adopting the persona of Madame Celeste, the mysterious psychic from Europe. With her new identity, Celeste moved from town to town, honing her craft and building a reputation. She learned to cold read, to manipulate emotions, and to exploit the grief and desperation of her clients. Her cons grew more elaborate, and her fees more exorbitant. It was in Aviara Cove that Madame Celeste set up her most ambitious operation yet. Little did she know that her pursuit of true supernatural power would lead her down a path of no return, culminating in a crime that would shake the foundations of her carefully constructed world. Robert and Elizabeth Morin were the epitome of old money and social grace. Their sprawling estate on the outskirts of Aviara Cove was a testament to generations of wealth accumulated through shrewd investments and inherited fortune. Robert, in his early 60s, had made a name for himself in the world of finance, while Elizabeth was known for her philanthropic efforts and impeccable taste. The Morans had moved to Aviara Cove 5 years ago, seeking a quieter life away from the bustle of New York City. They quickly became pillars of the community, hosting lavish charity galas and contributing generously to local causes. Their fairy tale romance and seemingly perfect life were the envy of many in town. However, beneath the polished exterior lay a web of secrets and unfulfilled desires. Robert, despite his business acumen, harbored a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had worked for. This paranoia led him to make increasingly risky investments, seeking to multiply his wealth to ensure his legacy. Elizabeth, on the other hand, struggled with the loss of her twin sister in a car accident years ago, an event that left her with a profound sense of guilt and a desperate need for closure. It was Elizabeth who first heard of Madame Celeste through the town's gossip mill. Initially skeptical, she found herself drawn to the idea of communicating with her lost sister. Robert, ever the pragmatist, dismissed the notion of psychics and mediums as nonsense, but as he watched his wife sink deeper into melancholy, he reluctantly agreed to accompany her to a session with the renowned psychic. The Morans' decision to seek out Madame Celeste would prove to be fateful. Their wealth, combined with their emotional vulnerabilities, made them the perfect marks for the cunning psychic. As they made there for their first appointment, neither Robert nor Elizabeth could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. They were about to step into a world where their deepest fears and most fervent hopes would be used against them, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed and horror. The first meeting between Madame Celeste and the Morans took place on a crisp autumn evening. As the couple entered the dimly lit parlor, they were immediately enveloped by the heady scent of incense and the soft glow of candles. Madame Celeste, resplendent in a deep purple gown adorned with silver stars, greeted them with a knowing smile that seemed to pierce their very souls. Elizabeth, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and trepidation, spoke first. "Madame Celeste, I've heard so much about you and we hope you can help us." The psychic's gaze lingered on Elizabeth, noting the slight tremor in her voice and the way she clutched her husband's arm. Without missing a beat, Madame Celeste responded, "The spirits have been expecting you, my dear. I sense a great loss in your past, a piece of yourself torn away." Elizabeth gasped, her grip on Robert tightening. Robert, meanwhile, remained stoic, his skepticism evident in the tight set of his jaw. Madame Celeste turned her attention to him, her voice taking on a more authoritative tone. "And you, sir, carry the weight of many responsibilities. The future weighs heavily on your mind." Over the next hour, Madame Celeste wove a tapestry of half-truths and educated guesses, expertly reading the couple's reactions and tailoring her revelations to their responses. She spoke of Elizabeth's sister, describing her with just enough accuracy to be convincing, and hinted at messages from beyond the veil. For Robert, she alluded to business opportunities and potential pitfalls, her vague prophecies playing into his financial anxieties. By the end of the session, Elizabeth was in tears, feeling a connection to her lost sister that she hadn't experienced in years. Even Robert, despite his initial skepticism, found himself unsettled by the accuracy of some of Madame Celeste's insights. As they left, both agreed to return for further consultations. Over the next few weeks, the Morans became regular visitors. Madame Celeste carefully cultivated their trust, each session revealing just enough to keep them coming back for more. She began to suggest more elaborate rituals and expensive offerings to enhance their connection to the spirit world. For Elizabeth, these sessions became a lifeline, a way to assuage her guilt and find peace. Robert, while still harboring doubts, couldn't deny the positive change in his wife's demeanor. Slowly but surely, Madame Celeste was weaving her web around the wealthy couple, drawing them deeper into her world of shadows and secrets. Little did the Morans know that with each visit, they were inching closer to a fate far darker than they could have ever imagined. Madame Celeste's demands became more extravagant with each passing day. She insisted on rare crystals and precious metals for energy focus, exotic herbs and incense for purification, and even suggested that the Morans donate significant sums to various charitable causes to curry favor with the spirits. In reality, these donations were funneled into offshore accounts controlled by Celeste herself. The psychic's manipulation extended beyond mere financial exploitation. She began to insinuate herself into every aspect of the Morans' lives. Late-night phone calls became common, with Celeste claiming to have urgent messages from the beyond. She advised Robert on business decisions, conveniently aligning her visions with her own financial interests. For Elizabeth, she became a confidant, slowly isolating her from friends and family under the guise of spiritual protection. As her influence grew, so did Madame Celeste's obsession with the occult. The rituals she performed for the Morans became darker, incorporating elements of blood magic and sacrificial rites. She spoke of ancient powers and forbidden knowledge, her eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on madness. The Morans, too deep in her thrall to see the danger, followed her lead without question. Behind closed doors, Celeste pored over arcane texts, convinced that she was on the brink of unlocking true supernatural power. Her sessions with other clients became perfunctory, her focus entirely on the Morans and the potential they represented. In her twisted mind, their wealth and willingness to follow her every command made them the perfect vessels for a grand ritual she was planning. As her plans took shape, Madame Celeste began to lay the groundwork for her ultimate con. She spoke to the Morans of a great awakening that would require them to sever all ties with their old life. Under her guidance, they began to liquidate assets and make preparations to transfer large sums of money. Robert, his business acumen clouded by Celeste's influence, failed to see the red flags that would have been obvious in any other circumstance. Elizabeth, lost in her grief and the promise of eternal connection with her sister, was willing to go to any lengths Madame Celeste suggested. The stage was set for a tragedy of epic proportions. Madame Celeste, her grip on reality slipping with each passing day, had convinced herself that the murder of the Morans would be the key to unlocking limitless power. She meticulously planned every detail, from the ritual site to the method of disposing of the bodies. As the night of the Great Awakening approached, an air of anticipation settled. The Morans, unaware of the fate that awaited them, prepared for what they believed would be a spiritual rebirth. At precisely midnight, the Morans arrived, dressed in the white robes Celeste had provided. Their eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as they followed the psychic through the house and into the backyard. Robert clutched a briefcase containing documents for the transfer of their wealth, a necessary step for spiritual unburdening, as Celeste had explained. As they entered the clearing, Elizabeth gasped at the elaborate setup. A large pentagram had been drawn on the ground with what appeared to be ash, surrounded by flickering candles and strange symbols. At its center stood the altar, adorned with crystals, feathers, and a large silver chalice. Madame Celeste began the ritual, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic chant. The words, a mix of Latin and gibberish, washed over the Morans, lulling them into a trance-like state. As the chanting intensified, Celeste instructed the couple to lie down within the pentagram, their heads toward the altar. With practiced movements, she bound their wrists and ankles with silk cords, explaining that it was to anchor their spirits during the transition. The Morans offered no resistance, their minds clouded by the intoxicating blend of incense and blind faith. As the ritual reached its climax, Madame Celeste's demeanor changed. The mask of the benevolent spiritual guide slipped away, revealing the cold, calculating eyes of a killer. From beneath the altar, she retrieved an ornate dagger, its blade glinting in the moonlight. Elizabeth was the first to realize something was terribly wrong. She began to struggle against her bonds, her voice rising in panic. Robert, shaken from his stupor by his wife's cries, demanded to know what was happening, but it was too late. With swift, brutal efficiency, Madame Celeste plunged the dagger into Elizabeth's chest. The woman's scream was cut short as blood bubbled from her lips. Robert roared in anguish and fury, thrashing wildly against his restraints. Celeste turned to him, her face spattered with his wife's blood, and brought the dagger down again and again. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the gurgling of the dying couple, Madame Celeste began to collect their blood in the silver chalice. Her movements were methodical, almost reverent, as she muttered incantations under her breath. She truly believed that this act of supreme sacrifice would grant her the power she had long sought. As life ebbed from the Morans, Madame Celeste completed her grisly task. She dipped her fingers in the blood-filled chalice and began to draw symbols on her own skin. her eyes wild with a terrible ecstasy. In her madness, she failed to notice the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The ritual concluded. Celeste stood over the bodies of her victims, arms outstretched, waiting for the rush of power she was certain would come. But as the minutes ticked by, all she felt was a growing sense of panic and the cold realization of what she had done. With trembling hands, she began the process of cleaning up the crime scene. She had planned for this, but the reality of disposing of 2 bodies was far more daunting than she had anticipated. As she dragged the corpses towards a pre-dug grave deeper in the woods, her mind raced with plans to secure the Morans' wealth and flee Aviara Cove. In the pale light of dawn, Madame Celeste surveyed the scene of her gruesome crime. The once pristine clearing was now a tableau of horror, with blood-soaked earth and the lingering stench of death. She had managed to bury the bodies of Robert and Elizabeth Moran in the deep grave she had prepared, but evidence of the murder still littered the area. With a growing sense of panic, Celeste began the painstaking process of erasing all traces of the night's events. She gathered the blood-stained robes, the ritual implements, and the now empty chalice, stuffing them into heavy garbage bags. The pentagram was scuffed out, leaves and branches scattered over the disturbed earth. As she worked, Celeste's mind raced. She needed to establish an alibi, to create a narrative that would explain the Morans' sudden disappearance. Rushing back to the house, she showered, scrubbing away every speck of blood and dirt. She then set about creating a paper trail, forging emails and documents that suggested the couple had been planning a secret getaway. Using the information she had gleaned from her sessions with the Morans, Celeste began the complex process of accessing their accounts. She had coerced them into sharing passwords and account details under the guise of spiritual unburdening. Now, those same details would allow her to siphon off their considerable wealth. As morning turned to afternoon, Celeste made a series of calls. To the Morans' housekeeper, she explained that the couple had left for an emergency business trip. To their few close friends, she expressed concern that she hadn't heard from them since their last session. She even went so far as to call the local police, reporting that the Morans had missed an important appointment and weren't answering their phones. But even as she wove her web of lies, Celeste could feel it all unraveling. The hasty cleanup of the crime scene, the rushed cover-up, it all felt inadequate. She hadn't anticipated the overwhelming guilt and fear that now consumed her. Every car that drove past the house, every unexpected noise made her jump. As evening approached, a knock at the door sent Celeste into a panic. It was Detective Malika Collins, responding to the missing persons report Celeste herself had filed. The psychic invited her in, forcing a calm demeanor as she recounted her concerns about the Morans. Detective Collins listened intently, her keen eyes taking in every detail of Celeste's home and behavior. She asked pointed questions about the couple's last known whereabouts and their relationship with Celeste. Though the psychic maintained her composure, she could sense the detective's suspicion. As Collins left, promising to keep Celeste informed of any developments, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on the self-proclaimed psychic. She realized that her pursuit of power and wealth had led her down a path from which there was no return. The once confident Madame Celeste was now a woman on the edge, waiting for the inevitable moment when her crimes would be discovered. Detective Malika Collins had been with the Aviara Cove Police Department for 15 years, and something about the Moran disappearance case didn't sit right with her from the start. Her instincts, honed by years on the force, told her that Madame Celeste knew more than she was letting on. In the days following her initial visit, Collins dove deep into the investigation. She interviewed the Morans' friends, colleagues, and household staff. A pattern quickly emerged. In the months leading up to their disappearance, the couple had become increasingly isolated, their behavior erratic and secretive. Collins's attention focused on their connection to Madame Celeste. She discovered that large sums of money had been flowing from the Morans' accounts to various shell companies and offshore banks. When she traced these transactions, she found a complex web of financial maneuvers that all seemed to lead back to the psychic. Intrigued by Celeste's background, Collins began to dig into her past. She uncovered a trail of complaints and suspicions spanning several states, all related to psychic fraud and con artistry. The detective realized she was dealing with a sophisticated criminal, one who had managed to stay one step ahead of the law for years. As Collins delved deeper, she started interviewing Celeste's other clients. Many spoke of the psychic with reverence, but a few shared stories of feeling manipulated and pressured to part with large sums of money. One client, an elderly widow, tearfully recounted how Celeste had tried to convince her to sell her home and invest the proceeds in a spiritual cleansing ritual. The detective's suspicions grew when forensic analysis of the Morin's computer revealed deleted emails discussing a Great Awakening ritual with Madame Celeste. The language used was cryptic, but it was clear that the couple had been planning something significant for the night they vanished. Armed with this information, Collins obtained a warrant to search her property. As her team combed through Celeste's home and the woods behind it, the detective couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering something terrible. Little did she know that buried deep in those woods lay the gruesome truth of what had really happened to Robert and Elizabeth Morin. The search of Madame Celeste's property yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Hidden in a false bottom of her antique writing desk, detectives discovered a journal detailing her deepening obsession with the occult and her plans for the Morins. The basement revealed a makeshift laboratory where she had been experimenting with various hallucinogenic compounds, likely used to enhance her clients' spiritual experiences. But it was the discovery in the woods that broke the case wide open. A cadaver dog, brought in to search the expansive property, alerted to a spot deep in the forest. As police excavated the area, they unearthed the badly decomposed bodies of Robert and Elizabeth Morin. Detective Collins, watching as the bodies were exhumed, felt a mix of vindication and horror. Her instincts had been right, but the truth was far more gruesome than she had imagined. Forensic analysis would later reveal traces of the ritual, including remnants of candle wax and unfamiliar herbs on the victim's remains. With this damning evidence in hand, Collins moved to arrest Madame Celeste, but the psychic, perhaps foreseeing the net closing around her, had fled. As the search for Celeste continued, Collins pieced together the full extent of her crimes. Financial records showed that she had managed to transfer millions from the Morins' accounts in the days following their murder. Interviews with other clients revealed a pattern of exploitation going back years. The detective also uncovered Celeste's true identity as Celeste Dupont, connecting her to unsolved cases of fraud and theft across multiple states. It became clear that the Morin murders were the culmination of a lifetime of increasingly bold and dangerous cons. Law enforcement tracked Celeste to a remote cabin in the Adirondacks. As police surrounded the property, Celeste attempted to flee into the woods. In a tense standoff, Collins confronted the self-proclaimed psychic, who was now a shell of her former confident self. "Madame Celeste, or Celeste Dupont, your crimes have caught up with you," Collins called out. "There's nowhere left to run." For a moment it seemed Celeste might try to fight or flee, but then, as if all the fight had left her at once, she sank to her knees in the damp forest floor. As Collins approached to make the arrest, Celeste looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of defeat and something else, a lingering madness that sent chills down the detective's spine. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, from financial records showing the systematic draining of the Morins' accounts to the chilling contents of Celeste's personal journals. Forensic experts detailed the brutal nature of the murders, while psychologists attempted to unravel the defendant's complex psyche. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Thomas, Celeste's former partner. He provided insight into her early cons and the evolution of her tactics, painting a picture of a woman whose greed and delusions of grandeur had spiraled out of control. Celeste's defense team attempted to argue that she was not of sound mind, presenting evidence of her deep-seated belief in the occult and her conviction that the murders were part of a genuine ritual. They portrayed her as a victim of her own delusions, manipulated by the very forces she thought she was channeling. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that Celeste's apparent madness was intertwined with a calculating intelligence. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, citing the heinous nature of the crimes and Celeste's lack of genuine remorse, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the quiet town of Riverwood, the Matthews family was well known and well liked. John Matthews, a charismatic businessman, his wife Jane, a dedicated nurse, and Jane's teenage daughter Ava painted a picture of suburban bliss. However, behind closed doors, shadows of deceit and betrayal lurked. One fateful night, Ava was found dead in her bedroom and the town's illusion of peace shattered. Detective David Hunter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving the toughest cases, was called to the scene. As he surveyed the Matthews home, he could sense the undercurrent of tension. The initial reports pointed towards a domestic dispute gone tragically wrong, but Hunter's instincts told him there was more to this story. Jane was found crumpled on the floor, wailing inconsolably as she clung to her daughter's lifeless body. John's face was a mask of shock and grief, but something about his demeanor struck Hunter as off. In the days that followed, the investigation would unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and ultimately murder. Detective Hunter arrived at the Matthews residence on a chilly autumn evening. The house, a modest two-story home with a well-manicured lawn, stood eerily silent. Inside, the once warm and inviting living room was now a flurry of activity, with uniformed officers and forensic technicians meticulously combing through the scene. Ava's room was at the end of a narrow hallway on the second floor. The door was ajar, and a pool of blood stained the beige carpet just inside the threshold. Ava lay sprawled on her bed, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Her throat had been slashed, a brutal end to a young life filled with promise. Hunter's gaze moved around the room, noting the signs of a struggle. The nightstand was overturned, and a lamp lay shattered on the floor. He turned to the forensic officer. "What have we got?" The officer, a young woman named Carla, responded, "It's a mess. No signs of forced entry, and no murder weapon yet." Looks like she fought back, though. Downstairs, Jane Matthews sat on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. John hovered nearby, his arm around her shoulders. Jane's eyes were hollow, and she clung to John as if he were a lifeline. Hunter approached them, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Matthews, can you tell me what happened?" Jane's voice trembled as she spoke. "I came home from work and found her like this. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. How could this happen?" John tightened his grip on her shoulder, his face a mixture of sorrow and anger. "We're going to find out who did this, Jane. I promise." Hunter studied John's face, noting the intensity in his eyes. He turned to his partner, Officer Johnson, who was taking notes nearby. "Get statements from the neighbors. See if anyone saw or heard anything unusual." As the investigation continued into the night, Hunter's mind raced with questions. Who could have wanted Ava dead? Was it a random act of violence or something more personal? The answers would come, but not without unearthing the dark secrets that lay hidden within the Matthews family. The Matthews family had lived in Riverwood for over a decade. John Matthews, a successful entrepreneur, owned a small chain of hardware stores. His business acumen and charm made him a respected figure in the community. Jane, his wife, was a nurse at the local hospital, known for her kindness and dedication. Ava, Jane's daughter from a previous marriage, was a bright and outgoing teenager, excelling in both academics and extracurricular activities. John and Jane's marriage appeared strong from the outside. They were often seen at community events, always together, always smiling. But behind the facade, their relationship was strained. John was often away on business trips, and Jane's demanding job left little time for family. Ava, caught in the middle, struggled with feelings of abandonment and longing for a stable family life. Ava's relationship with John was complicated. She admired his success and charm, but resented his frequent absences and the way he seemed to dominate her mother's attention. Their interactions were often tense, with Ava pushing back against John's authority. Despite this, she confided in her friends that she wished she could have a closer bond with him. Jane's love for Ava was undeniable, but their relationship was not without its challenges. As Ava entered her teenage years, the typical mother-daughter conflicts arose, exacerbated by Jane's long hours at work. Despite their disagreements, Jane was fiercely protective of Ava, always striving to provide her with the best opportunities. The Matthews neighbors, the Carters, were a significant presence in their lives. Lisa Carter, a vibrant woman with a magnetic personality, often visited Jane. The two women had become close friends, bonding over shared interests and the challenges of raising teenagers. Lisa's husband, Mark, a quiet and reserved man, worked as an accountant and kept mostly to himself. Unbeknownst to Jane, John and Lisa's friendship had crossed boundaries. Their affair began innocently enough, with casual conversations and shared drinks. But as John's discontent with his marriage grew, so did his attraction to Lisa. They found solace in each other's company, their clandestine meetings becoming more frequent and more intense. Ava, perceptive and curious, noticed the subtle changes. She saw the stolen glances, the hushed conversations, and the lingering touches. One evening, she followed John to the Carters' house, witnessing the undeniable proof of their affair. Shocked and betrayed, Ava confronted John, demanding he end the affair and tell Jane the truth. John's reaction was swift and violent. Fearful of his secret being exposed, he lashed out at Ava, threatening her to keep quiet. Ava, determined to protect her mother, refused to back down. The tension between them escalated, culminating in the tragic events of that fateful night. The Matthews' seemingly perfect life was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. As Detective Hunter delved deeper into their history, he began to see the cracks in their facade. The truth, he knew, was buried beneath layers of betrayal and anger. It was up to him to uncover it and bring justice to Ava. Detective David Hunter was known for his tenacity and keen instincts. With over 2 decades of experience, he had seen it all, from petty thefts to gruesome homicides. As he stood in the Matthews living room, he felt the familiar rush of determination. This case was personal. He could feel the weight of it bearing down on him. Hunter began his investigation by interviewing the Matthews neighbors. The Carters were first on his list. Lisa Carter, visibly shaken, recounted her interactions with the Matthews, emphasizing her close friendship with Jane. Mark Carter, on the other hand, seemed distant and evasive, his eyes darting around nervously as he spoke. Lisa admitted that she had seen John more often recently, but she attributed it to their shared social circles. Mark, when pressed, mentioned hearing arguments from the Matthews house but couldn't provide specific details. Hunter noted the inconsistencies in their statements, his suspicion growing. Back at the precinct, Hunter and his partner, Officer Johnson, reviewed the evidence collected from the crime scene. The lack of forced entries suggested that Ava knew her attacker. The struggle indicated she fought back, which meant the killer likely bore defensive wounds. Hunter decided to focus on the Matthews family dynamics. He arranged an interview with Jane, hoping to gain more insight into her relationship with Ava and John. Jane, still reeling from the shock, struggled to articulate her thoughts. She described Ava as a loving but headstrong teenager, often clashing with John over trivial matters. "Did you notice any changes in John's behavior recently?" Hunter asked, leaning forward. Jane hesitated, then nodded. He seemed more distant, more stressed. "I thought it was work-related. He was traveling a lot, and we hardly had time together." Hunter's mind raced. The frequent business trips could be a cover for something else. He needed more information about John's activities and interactions outside the family. The next day, Hunter visited John's office. His colleagues painted a picture of a dedicated but increasingly irritable man. They mentioned his frequent absences and whispered about a possible affair, though no one could provide concrete evidence. Hunter's next stop was the local coffee shop, a popular spot for the neighborhood gossip mill. The barista, a young woman with a penchant for eavesdropping, confirmed seeing John with Lisa Carter on multiple occasions. They seemed close, too close for just friends, she said, smirking. As pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Hunter's suspicion of John grew. He needed to find solid proof of the affair and connect it to Ava's murder. He decided to confront John directly, hoping to catch him off guard. John, seated in the interrogation room, maintained his composure. He denied any involvement in Ava's death, insisting that he was as devastated as Jane. Hunter pressed him about the affair, watching for any signs of guilt. John's facade cracked slightly. He admitted to spending time with Lisa, but insisted it was innocent. Hunter wasn't convinced. He could sense that John was hiding something, and he was determined to uncover the truth. As the investigation progressed, Hunter faced mounting pressure to close the case. The community was on edge and the media was relentless, but he knew that rushing to judgment could lead to a miscarriage of justice. He needed to stay focused and methodical, following the evidence wherever it led. Hunter's gut told him that the key to solving the case lay in understanding the true nature of the Matthews family dynamics and the hidden relationships that had turned their lives upside down. He was prepared to dig deep, no matter how uncomfortable the truths he uncovered might be. Jane Matthews sat across from Detective Hunter, her eyes red from days of weeping. She clutched a tissue, twisting it nervously in her hands. The grief and shock of Ava's murder had taken a visible toll on her, but there was a steely determination in her gaze. "Detective Hunter, I need you to understand. I loved my daughter more than anything," she began, her voice trembling. "We had our arguments, yes, but what mother and teenage daughter don't? She was everything to me." Hunter nodded, encouraging her to continue. Tell me about the night Ava was killed. Where were you and what did you do? I was at the hospital, working a double shift. One of the nurses called in sick, and I had to cover for her. I left the house around 6 p.m. and didn't get back until after midnight. When I walked in and found Ava, Jane's voice broke, and she took a moment to compose herself. Did you notice anything unusual when you came home? Hunter asked gently. Jane shook her head. No, everything seemed normal. The door was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. I went straight to Ava's room to check on her, and that's when I found her. Hunter leaned back, considering her words. Jane's alibi seemed solid, and her genuine grief was evident. But there was still the matter of her relationship with Ava, and the tension that had been brewing in their household. Jane, I've spoken with some of your neighbors and colleagues. They mentioned that Ava and John didn't always get along. Can you tell me more about that? Jane sighed, wiping away fresh tears. John tried to be a good stepfather, but Ava resented him. She felt like he was trying to replace her father. They argued often, especially about his long absences and his strict rules. And what about you and John? How was your relationship? Hunter probed. We've had our ups and downs, Jane admitted. Lately, things have been strained. He was distant, always busy with work. I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined it would lead to this. As Jane spoke, Hunter noted the raw honesty in her words. She was a mother grieving her child, a wife grappling with the unraveling of her marriage. Despite the initial suspicion, Hunter began to believe that Jane was not involved in Ava's death. But if she wasn't the killer, then who was? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but there were still gaps. Hunter needed to dig deeper, to uncover the hidden truths that would lead him to Ava's murderer. The answer, he felt, was closer than he had initially thought. As Detective Hunter dug deeper into the Matthews family dynamics, his suspicions about John grew stronger. The rumors of an affair with Lisa Carter had to be verified, and Hunter knew that uncovering this relationship could be the key to solving Ava's murder. Hunter decided to pay another visit to Lisa Carter. She was in her garden, pruning rose bushes when he approached. Her demeanor was calm, but Hunter could see the tension in her eyes. Lisa, I need to ask you some more questions about your relationship with John Matthews, he began. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she set down the pruning shears. What do you want to know? Hunter pressed on. There have been rumors that you and John were more than just friends. I need to know if there's any truth to that. Lisa's face paled and she looked away, struggling to find her words. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Yes, it's true. John and we had an affair. It started about a year ago. We were both unhappy in our marriages, and we found comfort in each other. Hunter nodded, noting her admission. Did Ava know about the affair? Lisa's eyes widened in shock. How did you know? Hunter leaned in, his voice firm. It's important, Lisa. Did Ava know? Lisa nodded slowly. Yes, she found out a few weeks ago. She saw us together and confronted John. She was furious, threatened to tell Jane. John begged her not to, but she wouldn't listen. Hunter felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces were falling into place. What happened after Ava confronted John? Lisa hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. John was frantic. He tried to reason with Ava, but she was adamant. They argued a lot after that. He told me he was scared of what Ava might do, that she could destroy both our families. Hunter thanked Lisa for her honesty and made his way back to the precinct. He reviewed the evidence once more, focusing on John's behavior and movements. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that John had something to do with Ava's murder. Hunter decided it was time to confront John with the new information. He called John into the station for another interview, hoping to catch him off guard. As John sat across from him, Hunter could see the tension in his eyes. John, I've spoken with Lisa Carter. She confirmed your affair. Hunter began, watching John's reaction closely. John's face tightened, but he remained silent. Hunter continued. Ava found out about the affair, didn't she? She confronted you and threatened to tell Jane. John's composure cracked. He leaned forward, his voice shaking. Yes, she found out, but I didn't kill her. I loved her like my own daughter. She was angry, but I would never hurt her. Hunter pressed on, his voice relentless. You were afraid of what she might do. You knew she could ruin everything. What happened that night, John? John's eyes filled with tears, and he buried his face in his hands. I didn't mean to hurt her. We argued, she pushed me, and I pushed back. She fell, and there was blood. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Hunter felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The truth was finally coming out. John, you need to tell me everything. "We need to know exactly what happened." John took a deep breath and began to recount the events of that night. Ava had confronted him again, demanding that he end the affair and tell Jane the truth. Their argument escalated, and in a moment of rage and fear, John lashed out. Ava fell, hitting her head on the nightstand. Seeing her lifeless body, John realized the gravity of what he had done. "I didn't mean to kill her," John repeated, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to stop her from destroying our lives." Hunter listened, his heart heavy with the weight of John's confession. Ava's death was a tragic result of a web of lies and betrayals. The truth was finally out, but the pain and loss it caused could never be undone. Hunter knew that John would face justice for his actions, but the real challenge would be helping Jane and the rest of the community heal from this devastating ordeal. The truth had been uncovered, but its consequences would ripple through their lives for years to come. Detective Hunter left the interrogation room, the weight of John's confession heavy on his shoulders. The case had taken a toll on everyone involved, but he felt a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that the truth was finally out. Ava's death was no longer a mystery, and her killer would face justice. Hunter returned to his office and began to piece together the final report. He reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, and John's confession, ensuring that everything was in order. As he worked, he couldn't help but reflect on the twists and turns of the investigation. He thought back to the initial days when Jane had been the prime suspect. Her grief-stricken state and the strained relationship with Ava had made her an easy target for suspicion. But as he delved deeper, he realized that Jane's love for her daughter, despite their conflicts, was genuine and unwavering. John was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The verdict brought a sense of closure, but it was bittersweet. The community mourned Ava's loss, and the once respected John Matthews was now a pariah, his reputation irrevocably tarnished. In the end, the story of Ava Matthews was one of sorrow, but also of resilience and hope. It highlighted the fragile nature of human relationships and the profound impact of truth and justice. For Detective Hunter and the people of Riverwood, it was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, even in the face of life's darkest moments. One early autumn morning, the lifeless body of Melissa Porter was discovered in her car, parked on a secluded road just outside town. Felissa, a local kindergarten teacher beloved by many, had gone missing 2 days prior, leaving behind a worried husband and a community in shock. James Porter, Melissa's husband, was the first to report her missing. James, a mild-mannered accountant, had been frantic with worry, his anxiety evident in the tremor of his voice when he spoke to the police. The discovery of Melissa's body turned his worst fears into a nightmarish reality. Alongside James, 2 other men, Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, soon came under the scrutiny of the investigation. Both had been intimately involved with Melissa, each harboring deep and complex feelings for her. Detective Sarah Davis, a seasoned investigator with a sharp mind and an unyielding determination for justice, was assigned to the case. As she delved into Melissa's life and the relationships that entwined her with James, Michael, and Joe, it became clear that beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case lay a labyrinth of secrets and betrayals. The story of Melissa Porter's demise was not just a tale of a tragic death, but of a tangled web of love, deceit, and vengeance. It was a crisp morning when Officer Tom Harris received a call about an abandoned vehicle on the outskirts of Oakwood. As he approached the scene, the sight of Melissa Porter's car sent a chill down his spine. The car was parked haphazardly, one wheel on the gravel shoulder, the other on the grassy verge. The windows were fogged, and the faintest hint of a foul odor wafted through the air. Harris peered through the driver's window and recoiled. Melissa Porter was slumped over the steering wheel. Her skin was pallid, and a faint trickle of blood had dried on her temple. The immediate cause of death was not apparent, but the scene suggested foul play. The small community of Oakwood buzzed with shock and sorrow as news of the discovery spread. Melissa had been missing for 48 hours, and her friends and family had clung to hope that she would return unharmed. Now that hope was cruelly dashed. James Porter was inconsolable, his grief magnified by the public scrutiny he now faced. He had been the one to report Melissa missing, and now he was thrust into the center of a murder investigation. Detective Sarah Davis arrived at the scene, her expression grim. She meticulously inspected the car and the surrounding area, noting the lack of defensive wounds on Melissa's body and the absence of a struggle. This suggested she might have been unconscious or incapacitated before her death. A preliminary examination revealed traces of a powdery substance on the passenger seat, which would later be identified as a potent sedative. Davis ordered the car to be towed to the forensic lab for a thorough examination and instructed her team to canvass the area for witnesses. The investigation had just begun, but the pressure to find answers was immense. The community wanted justice for Melissa, and the police were determined to provide it. The Oakwood Police Department quickly mobilized to investigate Melissa Porter's death. Detective Davis spearheaded the effort, her no-nonsense attitude setting the tone for the team. The first order of business was to question James Porter, whose proximity to the victim made him an initial person of interest. James was brought in for questioning at the station. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Detective Davis began with routine questions about his relationship with Melissa, their recent activities, and his whereabouts during the time she was missing. James explained that he and Melissa had been married for 5 years, a seemingly happy couple in the eyes of the community. He recounted the night Melissa disappeared. She had left the house around 7 p.m., claiming she needed to run some errands. When she didn't return, he grew worried and called the police the next morning. Davis noted his demeanor, searching for signs of deception. James provided an alibi, stating he was home watching TV that night. He offered to let the police verify his story with their home security system's footage. Davis made a mental note to follow up on this lead. As the interview progressed, another name surfaced: Michael Reynolds. According to James, Michael was a close friend of Melissa's, someone she had known for years. James admitted he had always felt a bit uneasy about their relationship, but had no concrete reason to suspect anything untoward. Detective Davis decided to pay Michael a visit. Michael Reynolds, a tall man in his early 30s with an air of easy confidence, welcomed the detectives into his home. He seemed genuinely distraught upon hearing of Melissa's death, insisting they had been just friends. However, his nervous fidgeting suggested there might be more to the story. The investigation widened to include Joe Clark, a local artist who had been seen with Melissa on numerous occasions. Joe, in his mid-40s, was known for his brooding temperament and reclusive lifestyle. He was less forthcoming than Michael, evading direct questions and offering vague, cryptic responses. Detective Davis sensed that both Michael and Joe were hiding something. The threads of Melissa's life began to unravel, revealing a woman who was far more complex and enigmatic than anyone had realized. With each interview, the investigation grew more convoluted, and the stakes became higher. The truth about Melissa's death was buried beneath layers of secrets, and it was up to Davis to dig them out. Melissa Porter was born and raised in Oakwood, a town she loved and never wanted to leave. She was known for her warm smile and her ability to connect with people, traits that made her an excellent kindergarten teacher. Her marriage to James was seen as a match made in heaven, though those closest to her knew there was more beneath the surface. Melissa met James at a charity event 5 years ago. James, an accountant with a stable job and a kind heart, seemed like the perfect partner. They married within a year, and for a while their life together appeared idyllic. But over time, Melissa began to feel restless. The routine of married life left her yearning for something more. Enter Michael Reynolds. Michael and Melissa had been friends since high school. Their bond had always been strong, and there were times when their friendship seemed to border on something deeper. Michael, a charming and successful entrepreneur, offered Melissa the excitement and passion she felt was missing from her marriage. Their relationship, while initially platonic, soon evolved into a secret affair. Melissa found herself torn between the security James provided and the thrill she experienced with Michael. Her feelings for Michael were intense, but they also brought complications and guilt. Then there was Joe Clark. Joe was a local artist, known for his moody paintings and reclusive nature. Melissa met Joe at an art exhibition a year before her death. Joe was different from both James and Michael. He was mysterious and brooding, qualities that fascinated Melissa. Their connection was immediate, and it wasn't long before Melissa found herself involved with Joe as well. Melissa's relationships with Michael and Joe were known only to a few close friends, and she took great pains to keep them hidden from James. However, managing these affairs became increasingly difficult, and Melissa's life grew more complicated. She loved each of these men in different ways, and each offered her something unique. But she also knew that this web of love and deceit could not last forever. As Detective Davis delved deeper into Melissa's background, she discovered a woman who was passionate and vibrant but also deeply conflicted. Melissa's need for connection and excitement had led her down a dangerous path, one that ultimately ended in her untimely death. With Melissa's body discovered and her secret life beginning to surface, suspicion naturally fell on James Porter. Detective Davis scrutinized his alibi, seeking any inconsistencies that might indicate his involvement in his wife's death. James's alibi rested on his claim that he was at home the night Melissa disappeared, watching TV and later falling asleep on the couch. The home security footage confirmed that James had not left the house during the critical hours. However, Davis was not entirely convinced. She knew that alibis could be fabricated or manipulated. The state of the Porters' marriage became a focal point of the investigation. Friends and neighbors painted a picture of a couple that appeared happy, but had their share of issues. Financial records showed that the Porters were struggling with debt, a potential motive for James to want his wife out of the picture. Life insurance policies on Melissa further added to the suspicion. Though the amounts were not exorbitant, James's demeanor during questioning was another point of concern. While his grief seemed genuine, there were moments when his responses were too measured, too controlled. Davis wondered if he was hiding something, or simply trying to protect himself from being wrongfully accused. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages exchanged between James and Melissa in the days leading up to her disappearance. The messages revealed growing tension between them, with Melissa expressing dissatisfaction and James responding with frustration. The arguments, though not overtly violent, indicated a marriage under significant strain. James's interactions with Michael and Joe also raised red flags. Both men admitted to having confrontations with James, who had become increasingly suspicious of their relationships with Melissa. James denied any knowledge of Melissa's affairs, but his anger towards the men was palpable. As the investigation progressed, James Porter remained a prime suspect. His potential motives, financial gain, marital discord, and jealousy, provided enough cause for Detective Davis to keep a close watch on him. However, without concrete evidence linking him directly to the crime, the case against him remained circumstantial. Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, the two men who had shared intimate relationships with Melissa, were next on Detective Davis's list. Each had their own reasons for wanting Melissa in their lives, and potentially reasons for wanting her gone. Michael Reynolds, with his charismatic demeanor and successful career, seemed an unlikely suspect at first glance. He had been Melissa's confidant for years, their bond evolving into a romantic relationship that brought both joy and complications. Michael's feelings for Melissa were genuine, but his frustration with her indecision and the secrecy of their affair had caused tension. During questioning, Michael admitted to feeling hurt and betrayed when he discovered Melissa's involvement with Joe, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with her death. Joe Clark was a different story. Known for his brooding personality and artistic temperament, Joe had always been somewhat of an enigma. His relationship with Melissa was intense and passionate, but also fraught with jealousy and possessiveness. Joe's art often reflected his tumultuous emotions, and his interactions with Melissa had been no exception. During his interview, Joe was evasive, his answers tinged with bitterness. He expressed deep sorrow over Melissa's death, but also a lingering resentment towards her for being unable to fully commit to him. Davis noted the contrasts between Michael and Joe. One a polished, successful businessman, the other a moody, introspective artist. Both had motives driven by love and jealousy, and both had been deeply affected by Melissa's actions. The detective also discovered that Michael and Joe had confronted each other on several occasions, their arguments escalating as Melissa's relationships with them became more entangled. The investigation into Michael and Joe's backgrounds revealed more layers to Melissa's story. Each man had been drawn to Melissa's vivacious personality and warmth, but both had also experienced the darker sides of their relationships with her. The complexity of these relationships suggested that Melissa's death was not a straightforward case of jealousy or revenge, but rather a culmination of many conflicting emotions and desires. As Detective Davis continued to unravel the intricacies of Melissa's life and relationships, she realized that the truth was buried deep within a web of passion, betrayal, and hidden motives. The challenge was to untangle these threads and find the one that would lead to Melissa's killer. As Detective Davis dug deeper into the lives of Melissa, James, Michael, and Joe, she began to uncover a series of startling revelations and secrets that painted a clearer picture of Melissa's complex world. The first major revelation came from Melissa's close friend, Laura Mitchell. Laura revealed that Melissa had been confiding in her for months about the struggles in her marriage and the turmoil caused by her relationships with Michael and Joe. Melissa had been feeling increasingly trapped and overwhelmed by the dual pressures of maintaining her marriage and managing her affairs. Laura also mentioned that Melissa had expressed fears about someone stalking her, though she never specified who. This new information prompted Davis to re-examine the evidence with fresh eyes. The possibility of a third-party involvement, someone who knew about Melissa's affairs and had a vested interest in her demise, became a compelling angle. Davis ordered a deeper investigation into Melissa's communications and social media, looking for any signs of threats or suspicious activity. The forensic analysis of Melissa's car provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. Traces of the sedative found in the passenger seat matched a prescription registered to Joe Clark. When confronted with this evidence, Joe's calm facade began to crack. He admitted to having the sedative, but claimed he had no intention of harming Melissa. According to Joe, Melissa had asked him for the sedative to help her sleep, a claim that was difficult to verify. Further complicating the investigation was a discovery in Michael's financial records. Large sums of money had been transferred between Michael's accounts and an unknown third party over the past few months. Michael explained that these were business transactions, but the lack of clear documentation raised suspicion. Davis wondered if Michael might have been involved in some form of blackmail or had hired someone to intimidate Melissa. The pressure on all three men intensified as Davis continued to piece together Melissa's last days. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues revealed that Melissa had been planning to leave Oakwood, possibly to escape the tangled relationships she had found herself in. She had been seen packing boxes into her car and had mentioned to a colleague that she needed a fresh start. Then came the biggest revelation of all, a hidden journal found in Melissa's belongings. The journal contained detailed accounts of her relationships with James, Michael, and Joe, as well as her fears and plans for the future. Melissa wrote about feeling suffocated by James's controlling nature, exhilarated by her affair with Michael, and deeply conflicted about her intense connection with Joe. She also mentioned receiving anonymous threats, which she suspected were from someone who knew about her affairs. The journal painted a picture of a woman caught in a web of her own making, desperate to break free but unsure how. It provided Detective Davis with critical insights into Melissa's state of mind and the potential motives of those around her. With this new evidence, Davis felt she was finally closing in on the truth. Just as Detective Davis thought she was getting closer to solving the case, a surprising twist emerged that shifted the focus of the investigation. A new piece of evidence surfaced, a security camera recording from a nearby convenience store that showed Melissa in the company of a man who was neither James, Michael, nor Joe on the night she disappeared. The man in the footage was identified as Daniel Harper, a former colleague of Melissa's from a previous job in a neighboring town. Harper had a checkered past, including a history of violent behavior and a restraining order filed against him by a former girlfriend. The discovery of his involvement with Melissa added a new layer of complexity to the case. Davis brought Harper in for questioning. Harper, a wiry man with a nervous energy, initially denied having seen Melissa recently. However, when confronted with the video evidence, he changed his story. He admitted to meeting Melissa that night, but claimed they had only talked. According to Harper, Melissa had reached out to him because she felt threatened and needed someone to confide in. She had asked Harper to meet her away from Oakwood to avoid being seen by anyone who might know her. Harper's account seemed plausible, but Davis was wary. Harper had a motive: his unrequited feelings for Melissa and his jealousy over her relationships with other men. His past behavior suggested he could be capable of violence, especially if he felt rejected or betrayed. Davis decided to dig deeper into Harper's background and his interactions with Melissa. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of Harper's car revealed traces of the same sedative found in Melissa's vehicle. This new evidence linked Harper directly to the scene of the crime, making him a prime suspect. Harper's story began to unravel under the weight of mounting evidence. He confessed that he had given Melissa the sedative, but insisted it was for her own protection. claiming she had asked for it to calm her nerves. Detective Davis knew that Harper's involvement complicated the narrative, but she also suspected there was more to the story. Harper's account of events didn't entirely align with the evidence. Davis hypothesized that Harper might have been manipulated by someone else, possibly Michael or Joe, to carry out the crime. The idea of a larger conspiracy began to take shape. As Davis continued to press Harper for details, he revealed a startling detail. He had been receiving anonymous payments over the past few months, just like Michael. Harper claimed he didn't know who was behind the payments, but admitted they were meant to ensure his silence about his meetings with Melissa. This revelation pointed to a coordinated effort to keep Melissa's secrets hidden. Davis realized that the investigation had taken a dark turn, one that involved not just a crime of passion, but a calculated plan to silence Melissa permanently. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, and Davis was determined to uncover the mastermind behind the plot. The investigation took a sinister turn as Detective Davis unraveled the web of deception surrounding Melissa's death. The revelation of anonymous payments and Harper's involvement hinted at a larger, more nefarious plot. Davis now had to consider the possibility that Melissa's death was not just a crime of passion, but a premeditated murder orchestrated by someone with a hidden agenda. Davis's team focused on tracing the source of the payments. Financial records showed a series of transactions funneled through a shell company, eventually leading to an offshore account. The intricate financial trail suggested a high level of planning and resourcefulness, characteristics not typically associated with crimes of passion. This new lead pointed towards someone with significant financial acumen and the means to cover their tracks, potentially Michael Reynolds, given his business background. Davis revisited Michael, armed with the new evidence. Under intense questioning, Michael's confident facade began to crack. He admitted to transferring money to Harper, but insisted it was to help Melissa, not harm her. He claimed Melissa had confided in him about her fears and asked him to arrange for protection, but he had no idea Harper would misuse the funds. Davis was not convinced by Michael's explanation. She suspected that Michael, feeling cornered by Melissa's indecision and the threat of their affair being exposed, had orchestrated a plan to remove her from the equation. However, Michael alone could not have executed such a complex scheme. The involvement of Joe Clark, with his volatile emotions and connection to Melissa, seemed likely. Confronting Joe, Davis presented the evidence of the sedative and the financial transactions. Joe, already unstable, broke down under the pressure. He confessed to being manipulated by Michael, who had convinced him that Melissa was planning to leave both of them and expose their affairs. In a desperate bid to prevent this, Joe agreed to Michael's plan to sedate Melissa and make her disappear. The dark truth emerged. Michael had orchestrated the entire plot, using Joe and Harper as pawns to carry out his plan. Michael's motive was not just jealousy, but a calculated decision to eliminate Melissa and protect his reputation and business interests. Joe, driven by his emotional turmoil, had been an unwitting accomplice, and Harper, lured by money, had played his part without fully understanding the consequences. Davis's investigation had uncovered a chilling conspiracy that highlighted the lengths people would go to protect their secrets and desires. The case was far more complex and darker than anyone had initially imagined, revealing the depths of human deceit and treachery. With the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, Detective Davis moved swiftly to secure arrest warrants for Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Financial transactions, confessions, and the forensic link between the sedative and Joe. Davis coordinated with her team to ensure that the arrests were conducted smoothly and without incident. Joe Clark was the first to be apprehended. He was found at his studio, surrounded by his hauntingly dark paintings. The arresting officers found him in a state of disarray, his guilt and regret evident. Joe offered no resistance, murmuring apologies and asking about Melissa's final moments. His remorse was genuine, but it could not absolve him of his role in the crime. Michael Reynolds proved more challenging. He had anticipated the arrest and attempted to flee. However, a coordinated effort by the Oakwood Police Department ensured he was apprehended at a private airstrip, trying to board a chartered plane. His arrest was marked by defiance and indignation, maintaining his innocence and accusing the police of fabricating evidence. With both suspects in custody, the prosecution began to build a robust case. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Oakwood's history, drawing intense media attention. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, journalists, and those who had known Melissa. The prosecution presented a compelling narrative of manipulation, betrayal, and murder, while the defense tried to paint Michael as a victim of circumstance and Joe as a man driven to desperation. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the extensive evidence and emotional testimonies. Ultimately, both Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and second-degree murder. Michael received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Joe, whose genuine remorse and cooperation were considered, was given a reduced sentence of 25 years. Daniel Harper, whose role was more peripheral, was charged with accessory to murder and received a lesser sentence of 10 years. His involvement, though significant, was viewed as being coerced by the primary conspirators. In the end, Oakwood returned to its peaceful existence, but the memory of Melissa Porter and the lessons learned from her case would never be forgotten. Her story remained a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring quest for truth and justice. At the center of this tragic story were three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Oliver Holbrook, a charismatic local businessman; Taylor Tanner, a devoted elementary school teacher; and Claire Reeves, a newcomer with a mysterious past. Their fates collided in a perfect storm of desire, jealousy, and deceit that would leave two of them dead and the third forever changed. Oliver Holbrook was born and raised in Millbrook, the only child of Robert and Elizabeth Holbrook. From an early age, it was clear that Oliver was destined for success. His father, a prominent local attorney, instilled in him a strong work ethic and an unwavering ambition. His mother, a former beauty queen turned socialite, taught him the art of charm and social grace. Growing up, Oliver excelled in both academics and athletics. He was captain of the high school football team, president of the student council, and valedictorian of his graduating class. After high school, Oliver attended an Ivy League university where he studied business and economics. But there was another side to Oliver Holbrook, one that few people saw. Behind his winning smile and easy charm lay a calculating mind and an insatiable hunger for control. He was a master manipulator, skilled at identifying people's weaknesses and exploiting them for his own gain. In both business and his personal life, Oliver viewed relationships as transactions, always looking for what he could get out of them. Despite his success, Oliver was never satisfied. He craved constant validation and attention, a need that manifested in a string of romantic conquests. He was known as a ladies' man, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. But as he approached his mid-30s, Oliver began to feel the pressure to settle down, at least outwardly. He knew that having a wife would enhance his image as a respectable businessman and pillar of the community. It was with this mindset that Oliver entered into relationships with both Taylor Tanner and Claire Reeves. In Taylor, he saw the perfect candidate for the role of Mrs. Holbrook, attractive, well-liked, and from a good family. Claire, on the other hand, represented excitement and passion, a secret indulgence he had no intention of giving up. Little did Oliver know that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, set in motion by the very women he thought he could control. Taylor Tanner was the epitome of the girl next door. Born and raised in Millbrook, she was the middle child in a family of 5, with 2 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her parents, Michael and Linda Tanner, were pillars of the community. Her father was the town's beloved family doctor, and her mother was a longtime volunteer at the local animal shelter. Taylor's childhood was marked by warmth and stability. The Tanner household was always bustling with activity, filled with laughter, and the aroma of her mother's home-cooked meals. This nurturing environment shaped Taylor into a compassionate and empathetic young woman, always ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear to those in need. Upon completing her degree, Taylor secured a position teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary School. He was at a local charity event, organized to raise funds for the school's new library, that Taylor first met Oliver Holbrook. She was immediately drawn to his charisma and confident demeanor. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Oliver wooed Taylor with grand gestures, surprise weekend getaways, lavish gifts, and romantic dinners at upscale restaurants. For Taylor, who had always led a relatively simple life, the attention was intoxicating. She fell deeply in love, believing she had found her soulmate. Claire Reeves arrived in Millbrook like a gust of wind, stirring up the quiet town with her mysterious past and alluring presence. Unlike Taylor and Oliver, Claire was an outsider, having grown up in a series of foster homes across the state of New York. Her childhood was marked by instability and loneliness, experiences that shaped her into a complex and often unpredictable adult. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, Claire was placed in the foster care system at the age of 3. Over the next 15 years, she bounced from one home to another, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. This transient lifestyle left Claire with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a desperate need for love and acceptance. Despite the challenges of her upbringing, Claire was fiercely intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, using her studies as an escape from the chaos of her personal life. Her academic success eventually earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York City, where she studied psychology. After graduation, Claire worked as a marketing executive in Manhattan for several years. She was successful in her career, but her personal life was a series of short-lived, tumultuous relationships. Each failed romance left her feeling more empty and desperate for connection. It was in the wake of a particularly painful breakup that Claire decided to leave the city behind and start fresh. She had inherited a modest sum of money from a former foster mother who had shown her particular kindness, and she used this windfall to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Millbrook. Claire was drawn to the town's picturesque charm and the promise of a simpler life. Upon her arrival in Millbrook, Claire quickly caught the attention of the locals. Her striking looks and big city sophistication made her stand out in the small town. She found work as a consultant for local businesses, using her marketing expertise to help them expand their reach. It was at one of these consulting jobs that Claire first encountered Oliver Holbrook. The attraction between them was immediate and electric. In Oliver, Claire saw everything she had ever wanted: success, stability, and the promise of love. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a happy ending. As Claire and Oliver began their clandestine affair, she convinced herself that she had finally found her place in the world. She threw herself into the relationship with the desperation of someone who had never known true belonging. However, Claire's fragile sense of security would soon be shattered by the revelation of Oliver's engagement to Taylor. This betrayal would trigger all of Claire's deepest fears and insecurities, setting in motion a tragic chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the town of Millbrook. As summer turned to fall in Millbrook, the lives of Oliver, Taylor, and Claire became increasingly entangled in a complex web of desire, deceit, and jealousy. Oliver, ever the skilled manipulator, carefully navigated his relationships with both women, feeding each of them just enough attention and affection to keep them invested. With Taylor, Oliver played the role of the devoted fiancé. He attended local events by her side, charmed her family at Sunday dinners, and made grand plans for their future together. Taylor basked in the glow of their engagement, excitedly sharing details of their upcoming wedding with anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Oliver's encounters with Claire took place in the shadows. They met in out-of-the-way restaurants in neighboring towns, or at Claire's secluded cottage. During these stolen moments, Oliver showered Claire with the passion and intensity that he carefully held back from Taylor. He fed Claire's hopes with vague promises of a future together, always with the caveat that he needed time to handle things with Taylor. As the weeks passed, tension began to build between Taylor and Claire. Even though Taylor remained unaware of the true nature of Claire's relationship with Oliver, the two women often found themselves at the same local events, with Claire's presence invariably drawing Oliver's attention away from his fiancée. Taylor, trusting and naive, initially tried to befriend Claire. Sensing the newcomer's loneliness, she invited Claire to girls' nights out and community functions, unwittingly providing more opportunities for Oliver and Claire to cross paths. Claire, consumed by her feelings for Oliver and racked with guilt over betraying Taylor's friendly overtures, became increasingly volatile. Her behavior swung between overly solicitous towards Taylor and barely concealed hostility. These mood swings did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, who began to speculate about the source of Claire's apparent instability. Oliver observed the growing friction between the two women with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. While he worried about his carefully constructed double life unraveling, he also reveled in the knowledge that two beautiful women were competing for his affections. As autumn progressed and the date of Oliver and Taylor's wedding drew nearer, the situation became increasingly untenable. Claire's demands for Oliver to leave Taylor grew more frequent and desperate, while Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Little did any of them know that their actions over the next few months would shatter the peaceful facade of Millbrook and change their lives forever. On a crisp October morning, the day of Oliver and Taylor's wedding arrived. The entire town of Millbrook seemed to be in attendance, filling the picturesque white church to capacity. Taylor, radiant in a classic white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face beaming with joy and love. Oliver stood at the altar, outwardly the picture of a happy groom, but those who knew him well might have noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that belied his calm exterior. As he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish Taylor for all eternity, his thoughts couldn't help but stray to Claire. Unbeknownst to the happy couple and their guests, Claire was outside the church, hidden from view but close enough to hear the ceremony. Each word of love and devotion that echoed from within the building was like a dagger to her heart. As the church bells rang out, signaling the completion of the ceremony, Claire felt something inside her snap. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with the entire town celebrating the union of two of its most beloved residents. Taylor danced and laughed, surrounded by friends and family, while Oliver played his role to perfection, ever the charming and attentive new husband. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, Oliver found his mask slipping. More than once, Taylor caught him staring off into the distance, a troubled expression on his face. When she asked what was wrong, he brushed off her concerns with a quick smile and a kiss. As the newlyweds drove off to their honeymoon, tin cans rattling behind their car and well wishes ringing in their ears, neither of them could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. For in the shadows, Claire Reeves was already plotting her revenge. In the weeks following Oliver and Taylor's wedding, Claire Reeves spiraled into a pit of despair and obsession. The life she had imagined for herself, a future with Oliver, had been snatched away, leaving her feeling betrayed and discarded. Her fragile psyche, already damaged by years of abandonment and instability, began to fracture under the weight of her grief and anger. At first, Claire tried to move on. She threw herself into her work, taking on more consulting projects than ever before. She attempted to socialize, accepting invitations to local gatherings and community events. But everywhere she went, she was confronted with reminders of Oliver and Taylor's happiness. The newlyweds were the talk of the town, their smiling faces seeming to mock Claire at every turn. As her pain deepened, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up late to meetings or missing them entirely. Her appearance, once impeccable, grew disheveled. Concerned neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets late at night, muttering to herself. But it was Claire's growing obsession with Taylor that truly marked her descent into madness. She began stalking the young teacher, following her to and from work, watching her house from a distance. Claire convinced herself that if she could just understand Taylor, figure out what made her so special in Oliver's eyes, she could win him back. Claire's cottage became a shrine to her obsession. Walls were covered with photos of Taylor cut from local newspapers and printouts from social media. She created elaborate timelines and diagrams, trying to piece together every detail of Taylor's life and her relationship with Oliver. As weeks turned into months, Claire's fantasies grew darker. She began to imagine scenarios where Taylor was out of the picture, leaving the path clear for her to reclaim Oliver's affections. At first, these were harmless daydreams, Taylor moving away or realizing she didn't love Oliver after all. But gradually, Claire's thoughts turned to murder. She spent hours researching different methods, weighing the pros and cons of each with a detached, almost clinical precision. She created multiple plans, each more elaborate than the last, always careful to cover her tracks and establish alibis. Throughout this time, Claire maintained sporadic contact with Oliver. Their encounters were brief and increasingly tense, with Claire alternating between desperate pleas for him to leave Taylor and icy accusations of betrayal. Oliver, growing uncomfortable with Claire's intensity, began to distance himself, unaware of the dangerous turn her obsession had taken. As winter settled over Millbrook, Claire's plans began to crystallize. She had chosen her method, a staged hit-and-run accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. In her deluded mind, she had convinced herself that eliminating Taylor was not just for her own benefit, but for Oliver's as well. She truly believed that he was trapped in an unhappy marriage and that she would be liberating him. The night before she planned to carry out her deadly scheme, Claire stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the wild-eyed woman staring back at her. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind, but then she remembered the sound of wedding bells, the sight of Oliver kissing his bride, and her resolve hardened once more. On a foggy Wednesday morning in February, Taylor Tanner Holbrook left her house for her daily jog, just as she had done countless times before. The streets were quiet, most of Millbrook's residents still tucked away in their warm beds. Taylor, with her bright yellow running jacket and bouncing ponytail, was a spot of color in the gray landscape. Unbeknownst to Taylor, Claire Reeves was waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She sat in a stolen car at the end of a secluded stretch of road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As Taylor's form appeared through the mist, Claire took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The next few moments passed in a blur of screeching tires, a muffled scream, and the sickening thud of impact. Claire, operating on autopilot, quickly drove away from the scene, leaving Taylor's crumpled body on the side of the road. It was a jogger who found Taylor an hour later. By then it was too late. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, Taylor was pronounced dead at the scene. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, leaving the town reeling in shock and grief. In the immediate aftermath, Claire's plan seemed to work perfectly. The police initially treated the incident as a tragic hit-and-run accident. Claire had meticulously planned her alibi, making sure she was seen at a 24-hour diner in a neighboring town both before and after the time of Taylor's death. Oliver, upon hearing the news of his wife's death, put on a convincing display of grief. He wept openly at the funeral, leaning on friends and family for support. To all outward appearances, he was a devastated widower, struggling to come to terms with his loss. But as the initial shock wore off and the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in the facade. Detective Lisa Montague, assigned to the case, sensed that there was more to Taylor's death than a simple accident. As she dug deeper, she began to uncover the tangled web of relationships that had led to this tragic event. Meanwhile, Claire watched from the sidelines, a mix of guilt and triumph warring within her. She had achieved her goal. Taylor was gone. Now surely Oliver would be hers, but as the days passed and Oliver remained distant, doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she made a terrible mistake? In the weeks following Taylor's death, Millbrook was shrouded in a pall of grief and suspicion. The once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, wondering if a killer walked among them. Detective Montague's investigation sent ripples through the community as she interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances of Taylor. Oliver Holbrook maintained his role as the grieving widower, making tearful appearances on local news channels and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of Taylor's killer. He threw himself into charity work in Taylor's name, establishing a foundation to support local education initiatives. Claire, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her, manifesting in bouts of insomnia and panic attacks. She obsessively followed the news of the investigation, terrified that each day would bring a knock on her door from the police. As Detective Montague delved deeper into Taylor's life, she began to uncover inconsistencies in Oliver's story. Several witnesses reported seeing him arguing with Taylor in the weeks leading up to her death. Financial records showed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. The detective's attention also turned to Claire. Her erratic behavior in the months prior to Taylor's death had not gone unnoticed, and her sudden calming in the aftermath raised suspicions. When questioned, Claire's alibi seemed airtight, but Montague sensed she was hiding something. As winter gave way to spring, Claire's initial elation at having eliminated her rival began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Despite her expectations, Oliver had not rushed into her arms in the wake of Taylor's death. In fact, he had become increasingly distant, avoiding her calls and making excuses to cancel their planned meetings. Frustrated and confused, Claire decided to confront Oliver at his office after hours. As she approached the building, she noticed a light on in his window. Peering inside, she saw Oliver in an intimate embrace with a woman she didn't recognize. The sight sent Claire reeling, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on Claire. She had murdered an innocent woman, destroyed countless lives, all for a man who had never truly cared for her. The realization was devastating. Overwhelmed by guilt and anger, Claire stormed into Oliver's office, catching him and the unknown woman by surprise. What followed was a heated confrontation, with Claire unleashing years of pent-up pain and rage. She accused Oliver of using her, of manipulating her feelings to get rid of Taylor. Oliver, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking, didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he coldly informed Claire that she had served her purpose and was no longer needed. He threatened to expose her role in Taylor's death if she didn't disappear from his life for good. Shattered and desperate, Claire fled the office, her mind racing. She now realized the true extent of Oliver's manipulation and her own terrible mistake. As she drove home in a daze, Claire was unaware that her confrontation with Oliver had been witnessed by someone else, someone who would soon set in motion the final act of this tragic play. The woman Claire had seen with Oliver was Olivia Chen, a brilliant young lawyer who had recently joined Oliver's firm. Olivia had been drawn into an affair with Oliver, seduced by his charm and the promise of career advancement. However, unlike Claire, Olivia was not blind to Oliver's true nature. On the night of Claire's confrontation with Oliver, Olivia had hidden herself in an adjoining room, overhearing every word of their heated exchange. The revelation of Oliver's involvement in his wife's death left her cold with horror and disgust. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She knew she should go to the police with what she had learned, but fear of professional repercussions and her own complicity in the affair held her back. As she observed Oliver continuing to play the role of grieving widower, her revulsion grew. Determined to uncover the full truth, Olivia began her own covert investigation. She meticulously combed through Oliver's files and emails, slowly piecing together the extent of his deceit. What she discovered went far beyond Taylor's murder, revealing a pattern of fraud and manipulation that spanned years. With each new revelation, Olivia's resolve strengthened. She knew what she had to do. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, Olivia confronted Oliver in his office late one evening. She laid out everything she had discovered, from his manipulation of Claire to his fraudulent business practices. Oliver, realizing the precariousness of his situation, attempted to charm and threaten Olivia into silence. But Olivia was prepared. She had secretly recorded their entire conversation, capturing Oliver's implicit admission of guilt. As she turned to leave, intending to take her evidence to the police, Oliver snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he attacked Olivia, attempting to wrestle the recording device from her hands. What Oliver didn't know was that Olivia, haunted by the fate of Taylor Tanner Holbrook, had come prepared. In the struggle, she managed to reach into her purse and pull out a small pistol. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty office building. Oliver Holbrook, the man who had manipulated so many, who had indirectly caused the death of his wife and the ruin of Claire Reeves, crumpled to the floor. Olivia stood over him, the smoking gun still in her hand, a mix of shock and grim satisfaction on her face. As sirens wailed in the distance, Olivia calmly sat down to wait for the police. She knew that her actions would have consequences, but she also knew that the truth would finally come to light. Oliver Holbrook's reign of deception was over. The shot that killed Oliver Holbrook reverberated through Millbrook, setting off a chain reaction that would finally bring the full story of Taylor's death to light. As Olivia Chen was taken into custody, the true extent of Oliver's manipulations began to unravel. In the wake of Oliver Holbrook's death, the investigation into Taylor's murder took on new urgency. Detective Montague, armed with the evidence Olivia had gathered, began to piece together the full picture of events that had transpired over the past year. Claire Reeves, racked with guilt and fear, finally broke down under questioning. She confessed to her role in Taylor's death, providing a detailed account of her actions and motivations. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Oliver's manipulation and the extent to which he had orchestrated the events leading to his wife's murder. Claire, having confessed to Taylor's murder, was sentenced to life in prison. Olivia's case was more complex. She was convicted of manslaughter, but received a reduced sentence due to the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death. The tragic tale of Oliver Holbrook, Taylor Tanner, Claire Reeves, and Olivia Chen would be remembered for years to come. a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most picturesque surfaces.